All right, so thanks for having me. My name is Mohammed Allo. I'm a cardiologist. I'm a clinical assistant professor of cardiovascular medicine at multiple universities. Also, if you didn't know, I'm a National Association of Sports Medicine certified personal trainer. So today we're going to be talking about diet, obesity, metabolic syndrome, and weight loss. Now, I've given this talk hundreds of times in the last year, a lot of times through Zoom, just like today. But this talk, because it's to cardiology fellows and physicians, I've included a lot more data and detail. So this by far is my most up-to-date, most recent talk on weight loss. Now, obviously, diet, obesity, metabolic syndrome, and weight loss, each one of these can be a 1.5 hour lecture. And in fact, if you go to my YouTube channel, I have a 1.5 lecture on almost every single one of those topics. So we're going to try to break this up. I'll do part of this talk today and then next week, and then maybe I'll combine them all into one talk. So with that said, let us begin. First of all, I have zero disclosures. None of the companies that make these medications or any of the things I talk about do I actually get paid for or anything. Next slide. So the objectives / outline for this, and this is not everything. This is just a basic outline. First, we're going to talk about deficiencies in physician training. Why or how much of training you get in weight loss and obesity medicine, how much you don't. We're going to define some things. What are the definitions and the terminology that we're using? We're going to talk about the scope of the obesity epidemic and that kind of stuff. We're going to talk about various solutions, everything from diet to exercise to medications to a weight loss program, how to include this in your clinic or not to include it in your clinic, etc. We're going to talk about failed attempts, whether they're governmental attempts or patient attempts or our attempts at weight loss. And then I'm going to talk about weight loss that actually works. And that's obviously a vast topic in and of itself, but I feel like you're going to really enjoy this. So first of all, the most important point, I know you guys are all cardiology fellows and physicians and you're board certified and you think you're very, very smart when it comes to cardiac topics. However, the fact of the matter is we're not that good at teaching physicians about nutrition or weight loss or obesity, really. There's a huge lacking or lack of education in these topics. And you'll see in some of the studies that I post. Now, you'll notice down at the bottom, all of the studies that I post have a link. Almost every single one of them, if you click on it, or when you download my slides, and I'll make them available to you. But when you download my slides, there will be a link for you to click on so that you can then read the studies on your own. So this article here clearly shows that we are definitely not very well educated on nutrition and weight loss and those kind of topics. Another article here, teaching doctors in training about nutrition. Where are we going in 2016? Once again, another article talking about the importance of nutrition when it comes to atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease and how lacking we are in nutrition. Next article talks about nutrition education and family practice residency programs. And if you look at the conclusions, also a huge deficiency in training when it comes to nutrition for family practice physicians. Now, family physicians, I'm sure you're aware of this, they are the front line of medicine. They are who the patient sees first. And when our patients see family doctors, if even the family doctors don't know what to do about nutrition and weight loss, when they get to us, assuming we do know what we're talking about, this is not going to help either way. Not a huge percentage of people do end up seeing a cardiologist, but they can. And then if we don't even know what we're talking about, we're not doing anybody any favors. So this is the epitome of how bad it is. This is our article in our newspaper, our journal, the American Heart Association journal called Circulation. This is about us. So as cardiologists, if you read this article, this is in 2016. It talks about the future of cardiovascular education and training. This is talking to you guys, the fellows, the cardiology fellows, and the program directors of cardiac programs. and how we can improve our training and improve how we teach cardiology and preventative cardiology and, treatments and all this stuff about cardiology. If you go to this article, there's not one mention about nutrition or weight loss or the word fat or obesity. Go to this article. The link is right up here. Like I said, I put all the links up there. Go there and search, look through the article, just read it. Nothing about weight loss, obesity, fat, none of that. So even in our own articles, us as cardiologists, even in our own articles about how we should train cardiologists, there's not one mention of actually anything about nutrition, obesity, or weight loss, which is, it says a lot. This I decided to include in here in the Annals of Family Medicine. This is actually written by a patient. What I wish my doctor really knew, the voices of patients with obesity. Now, this is a free article. You don't have to register or subscribe to anything. You can click on the link right there. But this is in a patient's voice. And then there's hundreds of these on blog posts and other websites, CNN, whatever. But this is actually published in a journal, a medical journal, of what it's like as a patient to be called obese or to have obesity, the struggles and all that. I highly recommend that everyone reads this. So that's your homework for today. Now, this is the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now, you might ask me why I include this. So this is a psychological phenomenon that's very well known and been validated over time. It's been called different things over time, but the Dunning-Kruger effect is when this is a confidence versus competence graph. If you don't know anything and you have no confidence, you're down here at the bottom. When you read one article or one study or one book or, watch one Netflix documentary, suddenly you feel so confident and you think you know everything about this topic. You watched one movie or one documentary about it. You watch Game Changers or something on, veganism on Netflix, and you think you know everything there is about it. So you may not be very competent yet because you just read one article, but you think you know everything. Now, as you start to learn more and you move further and further along the competence axis, you start to realize, damn, I don't really know a whole lot about this. And the confidence starts to go down until you hit this, valley of despair, or, you realize how much you don't actually know. And then as you learn more and more and more and you become an expert in the field, then your confidence starts to go back up again. So why am I even mentioning this? Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because lots of doctors talk about weight loss and nutrition and exercise and diet and all this stuff as if they actually know what they're talking about. Even famous doctors, and I'm not going to mention any names, but there's doctors that have sold millions of copies of books or have huge followings online. They teach something that's completely wrong and inappropriate and unrealistic and not backed by science, but it sells a lot of books. And the other thing I want to tell you about this also is, like, you cannot just read one study. Let's say we read a study one day and it says, oh, salt is good for you. You should eat tons and tons of salt. And then the next day there's another one that says, no, you have to look at the totality of evidence and the totality of research on this topic. You cannot just look at one single study and say, okay, that's it. Everything about salt is we got to eat lots of salt. No, that's not how it works. You have to look at the totality of evidence and then look at the studies and see if they were well done, or was there an agenda, who backed them, who funded them. It's very, very important. And the other reason I mention this is because I'm not trying to brag, but I've literally spent 15, maybe almost 20 years now researching, lecturing, and studying weight loss and obesity. There isn't a single article that's been published on obesity or weight loss that I haven't read. And I've read almost every most important book on this topic, because there's thousands of books published every day. If you go to Barnes and Noble or any bookstore, the largest section is the diet, nutrition, fitness, and cookbooks. There's the this diet cookbook and that diet cookbook and paleo, keto, intermittent fasting, whatever the latest fad is. There's tons and tons of books. I've not read all of those because there's millions of them and there's so many. But I've read all the most important ones, or anytime somebody suggests one to me or sends me a book, I read it. So most important thing is make sure you know where you're getting your information from. You have to evaluate things carefully and make sure that you are actually learning and getting more. Now, there's nothing wrong with learning more and more. Just read more. But I highly recommend, especially as physicians in training, or maybe your physician's already graduated, try to learn as much as humanly possible about this topic. So, quick definition. What is metabolic syndrome? This is a collection of all of the worst things. You take an obese person who has hypertension, diabetes, obesity in the waist, or they call that truncal obesity, high LDL, low HDL, high total cholesterol, and high triglycerides. So you have collected all of the worst possible conditions that a human can have. Now throw in smoking and it's even worse. So a lot of people say, well, people who have metabolic syndrome have higher cardiovascular mortality and strokes and heart attacks than anyone else. Well, sure, you have collected all of the worst possible characteristics in a person or risk factors in a person and put them all together. So of course, people with metabolic syndrome are going to have all of these problems because this is the worst of the worst, basically. So that's all metabolic syndrome is. We could literally go into an 1.5-hour lecture on just metabolic syndrome, definitions and treatments and what to do and how much it affects this or that, but we're going to skip it for now. This is just for your knowledge. This is the collection of the worst, basically, possible risk factors. So the secret to weight loss. Every time I give this lecture, somebody comes up to me before the talk. Is like, hey, are you Dr. Al? I'm like, yes, I am. Like, hey, what is the secret to weight loss? Just tell me the secret. Well, the problem is there is no secret, and anybody selling you a secret, that you just eat this one thing, or you just take this one thing out of your diet, or you drink this one drink every morning and you magically lose weight, or you take this pill and you lose weight. That's not true. There is no secret to weight loss. This is because the reason people ask this is because humans have this psychological need or want to almost always want to find this trick or this shortcut, or they don't want to put in the effort. They wish that there was this one little simple way to do it. And unfortunately, there is no such thing. We've been trying for over 100 years now, over 100 years worth of research to try to find this one secret trick to weight loss. And there isn't any. So it's a lot of hard work and there's a lot of nuance to it. And we'll start getting into that. So the other thing I like to talk about is there's a difference between weight loss and fat loss. We're not trying to lose weight. All right. We don't want to lose muscle mass, bone mineral density, organ tissue density. Although if you have fatty liver, we do want to do that. But we don't want to lose lean body mass, bones, muscles, whatever. We do want to lose fat, however. And there's a nuanced difference. There's a way to lose weight where you mainly lose fat. And there's a way to lose weight where you could lose fat and lean muscle mass. And we'll get into that more in the details. But I just want to distinguish between the two because we're not trying to lose weight. Sometimes people come up to me and say, is there any way I can lose 30 pounds by next week? Well, sure, we could cut off your leg and you would lose 30 pounds by next week, but that's not something we want to do. We definitely don't want to crash diet or lose a ton of weight quickly because that accelerates lean body mass loss, and we don't want to do that. We'll get into the details. This is just me and my kids. They have found in behavioral science that the habits that you form when you're younger and the things that you get used to when you're younger you're more likely to perform and do when you're older. So I try to get my kids into the gym with me, working out as often as possible to try to get them kind of used to the healthy fitness workout lifestyle. Now, I got into bodybuilding probably 2018 or 19 or so. And, I wanted to share that journey with my kids. This is my 4-year-old daughter at the time. She saw me doing a plank with some weights on. I think that's 90 pounds there. Don't worry, she only has 2.5-pound plates on. No children were harmed in the making of this picture, staging of this picture. This is actually me. This is 2017. Dr. Allo, I was at the hospital rounding. Someone took a picture. I saw this and, I can tell you the story later, but I was like, oh my goodness, this is the worst picture I've ever seen of me. This is horrible. I was basically obese. I think my BMI here was 29.5 or maybe even 30. So I was basically obese. This is by July or August maybe of 2019. I was actually at a conference giving a lecture like this on weight loss. I took this picture. This is about as shredded as I got. I got down to about 7 or 8% body fat. Now, I've coached a lot of people down to incredibly low body fats, men down to the 5 to 7%, women into the 10 to 12% range, something in that range, which is pretty shredded. So it's doable and you can do it, but this is not anything what we're talking about today. We're not talking about bodybuilders getting on stage for a bodybuilding competition. We're just talking about obese and overweight patients, and maybe even ourselves that are overweight or obese, and how we can lose enough weight to just kind of get back to being fit or healthy. All right, so the scope of the problem, I'm not going to go into detail and read you every single word on the slide. You can pause this or, download the slides later. 79% of adults are obese. This is a little bit older. Now it's like 82%. 22% of adults are actually obese. This is overweight. This is obese. 16% of children are considered overweight, and then 5.6% are obese. Now it's much higher. It's almost 18.5 or 19%. And then 12% of children at this time, I think this is back from 2018, from the ages 2 to 5 are considered overweight as well. You've seen these charts. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you'll notice over the years, there was more blue, which is like 10% obesity or 10 to 14% obesity. As time went on, we got into the more maroon or dark red, which is 25% obesity rates. Time goes on, and now the darker colors are 35 and 30% overweight. More time goes on, more 30 and 35% overweight, more coverage, almost the entire Midwest, Southern United States, only a little bit of the West and East aren't. And then as time went on, pretty much every state is 30% or higher, with very, very rare exceptions. Now, this is a chart from the 1960s until now. You'll see extreme obesity in men and women down here, slightly uptick, almost, started out in the 2 to 3% range up to almost 10% now. You notice overweight men stayed steady and overweight women stayed steady, but the obesity of men and women has gone up. And these are mostly our patients. These are the patients you see who are obese. We don't have the extreme obesity that often. We have a few of them here and there. We don't have just overweight patients. Some of the younger ones that are, have tachycardia or anxiety are a little bit overweight, but then we have the obese, and these are mostly our patients. These are the cardiac patients that we deal with almost on a daily basis. So the next slide here. So again, just looking back through 1999 to 2016, the obesity rates are trending upwards. We're almost at 40%, almost at 20% in youth and adults. Now, despite gym memberships going up, obesity prevalence has gone up, occupational energy expenditure has gone down, but gym memberships have slowly increased. And you look at other studies that show from the 1980s, more and more people are buying gym memberships, and more Americans are actually active. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to the gym if you're buying memberships, but there is some correlation. A certain percentage of the population does go to the gym when they buy a gym membership. And they have done tracking and looked at it since the 1980s until now. More Americans are actually more active, but we are getting more overweight and more obese, and we'll get into why that's happening. Again, another study from 2005 to 2015, more and more gym memberships and health clubs. Both health clubs and memberships. Now, if you look at this graph, it shows that the gym industry or the fitness industry is recession proof. Multiple recessions along the way, memberships plateaued maybe a little, but then kept going up, and up. So it is a recession proof industry. If you want to get into something, maybe it's something to get into. So back in 1980, 46% of U.S. adults aged 20 and older were overweight. By 1999, it was 60%. And obviously now it's like 82%. More energy intake because of supersizing foods, greater consumption of high-fat foods, widespread availability, low-cost, good tasting, which is hyper-palatable, very energy-dense foods, decreased physical activity at work, home, and during leisure time. And then at any given time, 44% of women and 29% of men are actually considered dieting, or you ask them and they say they're dieting. Americans spend $50 billion a year on weight loss products and supplements and programs and pills, and we'll get into whether any of those actually work. So the cost of obesity, I'm not going to just read these to you. You can read them yourself. You can download the slides and take a look. The costs of obesity are tremendous, whether it's heart attack, stroke, gallbladder disease, cancers, missed days from work, osteoarthritis from knee replacements and hip replacements. All of that is there. Cancers as well, and lost productivity at work. All of these things are counted in the cost of obesity. Now, the medical complications of obesity, you guys are all cardiology fellows or physicians, you know this. Just take a look at this. I'll pause it for a second. So every single organ system in the human body is affected by obesity. Without question, just look at it. We all know our stuff because of the cardiac disease, but you look at almost every other organ system and they all have issues. Let me go back to this. So what about the non-medical complications of obesity? This is stuff nobody thinks about, like not fitting in a CT scan or MRI machine, abdominal surgery and healing, can't close back up. Medical emergencies, can they actually get you out of the house or out of the car? Difficulty dosing medications, the operating tables aren't capable, not fitting in an airplane. Stress testing equipment can't handle more weight. It's something, and for us, we have to do 2-day stress tests instead of one. That uses up the resources, uses up a slot that someone else can use, costs more. The inability to draw blood, or you need central lines all the time. Can't fit in certain masks, can't be intubated properly, not being able to dose medications properly because the volume of distribution is so huge, like Lovenox. Why is the maximum dose 175? Because we never tried it in anybody bigger than that. It was not tested. Do we know it works? Maybe, but we don't know. Same with lots of cardiac medications. Carvedilol 25 enough for someone who's 340 pounds, or do we need to go to 37.5 or 50, or maybe something we've never tried before? You need specialized heavy equipment to turn patients in hospital beds, or the nurses get injured. You get immobility and bed sores. All of these things are non-medical complications of obesity that no one ever really addresses or talks about. But keep these in mind. Diets are failing. That's just straight up. The good news is that most Americans have lost weight. About 6 out of every 7 Americans has lost a significant amount of weight, which is considered more than 20% of your body weight. But 50-70% regain it back in the first year, 85% within 2 years, 95% in 3 years. And then if you look at the studies, depending on which ones you read, 33 to 66% of people will gain back more weight than they actually lost. Huge fail. But there is this 5%, if you look at this 95%, 5% of people do lose weight and keep it off after 5 years. This next slide is just the studies that go with all that. If you look at all this stuff, that slide has all those studies and they're all clickable. Now, we want to know, how do you become a part of that 5%, or how do we coach our patients or ourselves to become part of the 5% that loses weight and basically keeps it off after 5 years? That's what we want to do. And these are the studies. Obviously, you can read these later. So here's a slide I always show. Is it just this? Is it this simple where you eat energy, too much energy equals fat stores, you expend more energy, you take fat out of your fat stores. You don't use up energy, it goes back into your fat, or whatever. Is it just like a seesaw or a scale where you have to balance energy in or calories in versus calories out? So in some ways, it can be this simple. For most people, probably 95 to 99% of people, it probably is this simple. Now, there's a lot of nuance to this. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this talk. I would just put this slide up on the board and I'd say, hey, just go eat less, run more, boom, weight loss. That's not the case. My patients have tried this. I've tried this. We've tried this. Millions of studies have been done on this. This doesn't answer all the questions. It does work. I'm not going to say it doesn't work, because it absolutely works. This is the law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed, except for nuclear reactors. But the law of thermodynamics states that this works. But there's lots of different nuances and explanations and studies to show why in some people it's harder to do. So we'll get into all that, and you guys will hopefully be experts on this. You're not going to get a better education on this than here. So first I want to talk about metabolic ward studies. The best studies they can do on diet and weight loss is something called a metabolic ward studies. Participants are locked into a ward, almost like a hospital floor or like a jail. They're not allowed to leave. So basically it's like a jail. They drink something called doubly labeled water, which you can read about below. And this helps us measure their intake, their outtake. We measure how much they're eating and not eating. But with doubly labeled water, you can measure their basic metabolic rate, their calories in, calories out, total daily energy expenditure, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, exercise activity thermogenesis, as well as the thermic effect of food and whatnot. We'll get into what all of these abbreviations mean and how we use them. But this is the best kind of study to measure the impact of food, macronutrients, how much you feed or overfeed or underfeed people, what happens to their BMR, what doesn't happen to their total daily energy expenditure, all of that. But the problem is it's expensive. Imagine taking people away from their families, away from their homes, locking them up for 12 weeks or 20 weeks or a year. It's super expensive. You need giant millions and millions of dollars of grant money to run something like this. These have been done and been done well. And we can extrapolate a lot of the data into real live living or, free living people. There's also, but this is not the only kind of diet and weight loss research there is. There are free living research and studies. And free living research and studies are people who just live every day, but they're monitored very, very closely and given very, very specific instructions on what to eat, how much to eat, what not to eat. So there are other kinds of studies that have been done also that are pretty close. When a metabolic ward study is done in short term, matches what a free living study shows, we kind of say, okay, it's been validated and it's good. So once again, I'm urging you not to just read one single study and say, okay, I know everything. We need to look at the totality of evidence and look at the agenda. Is the person trying to sell a crazy idea, or just trying to find a way to justify something, or just looking for weird proof that there isn't any? Or do they have to do a subgroup analysis to find anything? So this is definitely one of the better types of studies, but also very expensive and hard to do. So then, next question I usually ask people, and I have the chat thing open. You guys can just type in your answers. What is more important in determining your body composition, diet or exercise? I'll give you a second to type in your answers. So those of you who chose diet were the most correct. Diet is by far the most important. It's about 95, and in some studies, 97% of body composition. The other 3 to 5%, maybe even up to like 7% at the most, is exercise, and you'll see why later. But most of the time when I ask this question, about 30% of the crowd says diet, about 40% say exercise, and then like 30 or 40% don't answer or raise their hand for both. So just as a quick graphic, this is was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. We'll get into this a little bit more detail later. This is the control group, the gray, that did almost nothing. They lost almost 0 weight. They did lose maybe a kilogram. The calorie restriction with exercise is this bluish colored line. They lost 8 kilograms. The calorie restriction alone group lost a little bit more than that, 8.5, maybe 9. And then the very low calorie diet group lost about 11 kilograms. This is just to illustrate that whether you throw in the exercise or not, it's not going to make a huge difference. And in fact, you might lose less weight because of all the adaptations and the increase in hunger and appetite. And we'll get into all those studies soon. There's a lot of details. Now, when it comes to exercise, there's 4 basic modalities. There's something we call endurance, which is like aerobic exercise, or cardio. Most people call it cardio. There's strength training or resistance training. That's like your weightlifting. And then there's balance and flexibility. Balance and flexibility we're not going to get into because this lecture would probably end up being 10 hours long. When we talk about exercise, we're going to talk mainly about endurance and strength and the differences, or how we can kind of compare the two. So I'm not going to go through all of these studies, but I'm going to show you a lot of studies that show that exercise doesn't have too much effect on weight loss. But what does it do? It does help with some things. It's just not weight loss. So this study, after 3 months, exercise had very little impact on weight loss. The control group gained 2.6 kilos. The aerobic exercise group lost 0.04, and the resistance training group lost 0.6. So not a whole lot of weight loss there. The next study, after 12 weeks, the aerobic group lost 3.7 kilos. The aerobic plus resistance group lost 3.8, and it is statistically significant. It's still less than 9 pounds. So after 12 weeks, that's 9 pounds. Realistically, people should be losing between 1 and 2 pounds a week, depending on how overweight they are. It's about 0.5 to about 1% of your total body weight. So this is considered quite slow in terms of weight loss and in what we try to coach people to do, or how we train people to lose weight. Another study, at the conclusion of the study, the men in the exercise group had only lost 5.2 kilograms of body weight, while the women lost 0.4. This was done for 16 months. After 16 months, the amount of weight loss, maybe 10 to 12 pounds in the men, and like 1 maybe at the most in the women. Still, in 16 months, if you did it properly with diet, you could have lost over 50 pounds and maybe even more. This is a meta-analysis, found the mean weight loss of men who completed 30 weeks of exercise was 2.6 kilos, women was 3, and this is over 14 weeks. Also, not a lot of weight loss, maybe 5, 6, 7 pounds. Over 14 weeks, you could have easily lost between 20 and 30 pounds. Now, what about the effects of anti-obesity drugs, diet, and exercise on weight loss maintenance after a very low calorie or low calorie diet? This is a systemic review. So the conclusion here, no significant improvements were seen for dietary supplements and exercise. So the very low calorie diet alone or the low calorie diet alone were what caused the weight loss. No improvements from dietary supplements or exercise. So the exercise and anything else they added had zero effect. Now, we do know that exercise helps you not gain weight back that you've already lost. So if you have lost 30 pounds and you're exercising still or started exercising after you lost the weight, we know that you won't gain the weight back. And this is just a research study that shows that exercise decreased the rate of regain early in relapse and lowered the defended body weight. We know that your body likes to defend its body weight. If you weigh 180 pounds, your body likes to keep you at 180 pounds. If you decide to lose weight and get to 150 and you're exercising or start exercising, your body's more likely to keep you at 150. And we'll get into all the appetite regulation stuff and why exercise or an activity can or can't help with that. But definitely, we know that exercise is good at helping you keep weight off that you've already lost. So just remember that. Now, because exercise was not really helping with weight loss, researchers wanted to find, what if we focus on something else? Let's not focus on the weight loss. Let's focus on the waist circumference, the body composition, the decreased systolic and diastolic blood pressures, the improved insulin resistance, and all of that. And they have found that that these are actually good things to focus on, that you tell patients, look, your blood sugars, blood cholesterol, hypertension, all that stuff will get better with exercise. You're not going to lose a ton of weight, but you will improve almost all of these cardiovascular risk factors. So here they're saying focus on other markers of health, not just weight loss, because the exercise is not going to cause significant weight loss. And if you keep telling patients exercise to lose weight, and they're not losing weight, they're going to not continue it. But you show them that their hemoglobin A1C went down, you show them their systolic and diastolic blood pressures went down, and then they might be a lot more excited about it. So another article, diet or exercise interventions versus combined behavioral weight management programs. They found that programs based on physical activity alone are less effective than combined with behavioral weight management programs in the short and long term. So basically, if you met with a nutritionist and a dietitian and they told you how much to eat or not to eat, that was way more important than actually trying to do any kind of exercise intervention. Next study here. In this study that did show some weight loss over a long period of time, the conclusion that I'm highlighting down here, even in the studies that showed that exercise plus diet worked, it was a 0.5 to 1.1 weight loss over 2 years. That's 1 to 2 pounds at the most. Now imagine a patient comes up to you who's over 300 pounds and says, hey doc, I've been dieting and exercising for the last 2 years and I lost 1 pound, maybe 2 pounds. It's not very good. You could technically lose 1 to 2 pounds a week if you're that overweight, pretty safely and effectively while maintaining lean body mass. So this is not very good. Now, another study, meta-analysis of the effect of dietary counseling for weight loss. Compared with usual care, dietary counseling interventions produce modest weight loss that diminishes over time. So they found that when you go see a dietitian or a counselor and they talk to you about weight loss or dieting or all that stuff, you will lose weight the more often you see them. But as you stop seeing them or you kind of go back to your old ways and not really focusing on it, you're not going to lose as much weight, and there is more likely weight regain. Once again, I'm just putting this back up there for you to look at. So once again, just emphasizing that calorie restriction with exercise was no better than just calorie restriction alone, and may have even been a little bit worse. And then the very low calorie diets obviously work very well. Now, let's talk about what is total daily energy expenditure. So that's the total amount of calories you use or spend every single day. Now, your basic metabolic rate is 70% of that. Your basic metabolic rate is the amount of calories you need to lay in bed all day and do absolutely nothing. Basically enough calories to keep the lights on. That's about 70% of your total daily energy expenditure. Next is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This is all the activity that you do that's somewhat imperceptible, like the amount of steps you take, fidgeting, using your hands to talk, walking, shifting while standing there doing things. This is all non-purposeful exercise. Next is the thermic effect of food, which is about 10% of your TDEE. This is the amount of energy your body needs to just process the food that you ate. And then the last one is exercise activity thermogenesis. This is actual purposeful activity. This is you going to the gym, you jogging, you walking, you biking. If you'll notice, this is only 5% of total daily energy expenditure. That means you can't really go up really past 5%. No matter how much you exercise or what you do or whatever, you can only really affect your total daily energy expenditure by about 5%. So if you've been only burning maybe 1% of it and you increase your activity, although you've increased your activity by 5 times, you can only still really affect your TDE by about 5%. So it's a very small portion of your total daily energy expenditure. But this is just kind of a graph or a breakdown of what all these things are and how much they contribute to your total daily energy expenditure. Now, as an example, let's take a 187-pound person, and let's say they run for 10-minute miles, or here 7-minute miles. This is what burns the most amount of calories. Obviously, walking burns the least. Swimming laps is also kind of up there. And then different weighted people burn more or less calories. And this is just to illustrate. Let's say a person works out Monday, Wednesday, Friday, strength train 45 minutes, walk 15 minutes, etc., etc. They burn this many calories per week, which is 2,900. It still doesn't add up to the 3,500 calories a week, which are required to burn 1 pound per week. If you want to lose 1 pound per week, you have to find a way to either not eat 3,500 calories or burn them off somehow. And you'll notice that even if you did this much work, it still doesn't add up to 3,500 kilocalories. Now, this is very, very important. And it's important to understand this. So on this graph is total daily energy expenditure, and then physical activity. Now, we used to think that the more physical activity you do, the more calories you burn or the more energy you expend. This is what we thought, that if you get on the treadmill, you run for an hour, you burn 100 calories, another hour, another 100 calories, another hour, 100 calories, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, until you're burning so many calories. Now, we have found that that is actually not true. That you get on the treadmill, you might burn 100 calories for the first hour, maybe 40, 50 for the next hour, then maybe 10 that third hour, and then it caps it off. It's constrained or limited. This is called the constrained model of physical activity. There's a cap or a limit to how much calories you can actually burn with physical activity. What happens is your body takes away energy or calories from other activities, like mostly your NEAT, your NEAT, which is your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This is like you fidgeting, walking, whatever. You'll notice after you've been on a treadmill for a long time or ran a marathon or like whatever you do, you'll just want to lay in bed all the rest of the day or not do very much. Your step count drops down significantly after that, whatever. You might eat less, other things that the body does to lower the total amount of energy you've expended. So this is very, very crucial and important to understand that you cannot just get on a treadmill and run for 18 hours a day and burn 18,000 billion calories a day. Your body caps it, and there's a law of diminishing returns takes place. The first hour, maybe 2, you are doing okay, but then after that, it's kind of capped and you're not really burning any more calories. So this is the article that demonstrated that. Constrained total energy expenditure and metabolic adaptation to physical activity in adult humans. This is by Ponzer, and like I said, you can click on all of these and read them, and I highly recommend that. Another one, homeostatic and non-homeostatic appetite control along the spectrum of physical activity levels, an update perspective. This article shows that the more obese you are, the more dysregulated your appetite is. If you're more sedentary and less active, your appetite control is poor, and you don't really understand when you're satiated or not hungry anymore. So your appetite and satiety signaling is highly dysregulated. The more overweight you are and the less active you are. And just some key points, because I think this is an important one. Physical activity does more than just increase total energy expenditure. When activity is low, appetite is dysregulated, resulting in excess food intake and weight gain. Higher levels of activity seem to increase appetite control. So this is important. Physical activity is important for appetite control. You get better at regulating your appetite the more active you are. The combination of being too high in body fat and also being physically Physically inactive may further dysregulate appetite and satiety signaling, making weight loss efforts even more difficult. So the more body fat you have, the less lean you are, the harder it is to even regulate your appetite and satiety signaling. So physical activity and exercise may only be effective to a point for the goal of weight loss. At very high levels of physical activity, additional increases may not result in an increase in total energy expenditure, but rather a downregulation of energy expenditure expended from other components of total energy expenditure and no change in net expenditure. So this is very important. There's a cap to how helpful physical activity is and how much it can help you. The more physical activity you do, that does not translate into more daily energy expenditure. It's very, very important to remember that. Okay, next slide. So the body adapts to exercise to the point where you are burning very few calories. And they've done these studies where you wear the VO2 mask or the CO2 mask, and they measure how many calories you've actually burned on a treadmill. They found that the first time you run a mile, you burn, let's say, 100 calories. The next time you do it, it's like 80, maybe 70. As you get better and better and more adapted to running a mile, your body finds ways of burning less and less calories. And because you also improve your cardiovascular endurance, it becomes easier for you to actually run that mile and not have to expend as much energy or calories. So there's two different adaptive mechanisms that make it more difficult for exercise to do that, especially cardiovascular type exercise. Now, weight training is different because you can increase the weight. Next slide here. So physical activity, total and regional obesity, dose response considerations. Now, this is why you have that friend that says, hey, I started running and I lost, 15 pounds. Yes. When they look at these long-term studies, exercise, and I put this at the bottom, exercise can cause fat loss short-term, about 3 months. Almost any new activity you do, whether it's weightlifting, biking, hiking, swimming, whatever, most people will lose some fat up front within the first few months. Usually 2 to 3 months, people will lose some weight. But then once you're adapted, or as time goes on, or your body resets or wants to defend its body weight, you no longer lose fat and you can actually gain it back. And there's this dose response in these well-controlled studies. You can read this over here. You can click on all the data. But there are short-term studies that have shown that there can be some fat loss really fast up front. You see your friend like a few months later and he's gained all his weight back. I have a lot of friends that are, you haven't seen them because of the pandemic, or it's been a year or two since you caught up with them. And you're like, hey, buddy, what happened? It looks like you lost some weight. Good job, whatever. And it's like, oh, yeah, I started running, or I started, biking, hiking, weightlifting, whatever it might be. You will lose some weight in the beginning of almost any new stimulus or new activity because you haven't adapted really to it. And all the long-term studies show that once those kind of adaptive mechanisms have taken over, or your body has figured it out and you start eating more and your appetite goes up, the regulatory mechanisms and the defended body weight, your body goes back to its original weight or more. So exercise, the amount of exercise you'd have to do to lose weight is time prohibitive. Burning an extra 500 calories per day would require jogging to 5 to 6 miles per day, depending on how much you weigh, obviously. That may take 90 to 120 minutes. The amount of energy you can burn from physical activity is capped and constrained. So don't forget that. While theoretically you may burn 500 calories a day at your body weight doing X activity, this activity or that activity, the reality is it's capped and constrained, and you probably aren't burning that much. You follow the Fitbit and the watches, and your watch says, oh, you are swimming and you burned 1,000 calories. I can guarantee you guys that you did not burn 1,000 calories swimming. Most of those watches, in terms of like the actual calories burned, the Fitbits, the Apple Watches, Google Watches, whatever, are off. And people say you should probably use 25 to 30% of that number as what you've actually really burned. And we'll talk about that more later on. Exercise is good for keeping lost weight off, but will not help you lose weight, or at least not long term. Eating less and healthier is the key. Exercise can suppress and or increase appetite. Some people respond to exercise by getting very, very hungry. Some people, it suppresses their appetite. Now, over a 24-hour period, it kind of balances out and we find it's kind of weight neutral. But some people, when they get that huge surge of appetite and want to eat, they sometimes overeat. Exercise activates the flight, fight response and puts the rest digest system on hold. Exercise definitely lowers cardiovascular mortality significantly, and exercise alone is ineffective for weight loss. However, we do know that exercise improves cardiovascular mortality as well as all-cause mortality. It can lower your blood pressure, systolic and diastolic, lowers your LDL, which is your bad cholesterol, improves your blood sugar, increases HDL, which is your good cholesterol, can help prevent weight regain, either increases or decreases hunger, kind of depending on the person, and then activates compensatory adaptive mechanisms. But we know it just does not cause significant weight loss. Now, this obviously doesn't mean you can't do it. You don't go home and tell your other doctor friends or family that, hey, the cardiologist said not to do any exercise or not to do any cardio. I'm a cardiologist. Cardio is part of my name. We're going to talk about those things. Don't think that I'm telling people not to do exercise. Exercise is fantastic for you. It does lots and lots of things. It's just not the most efficient way to lose weight. And that's kind of what we're trying to get at. If you want to counsel patients and counsel people on losing weight and you want them to be successful, or you yourself want to be successful, you have to know what to actually do. You can't just tell people, oh, just eat less and exercise more. That's not going to work. You have to say the right things and look at the research and look at the data and the totality of data and tell people to do the correct things. So this is an article of the Journal of American College of Cardiology. This is our journal, 2014, running at even a slow pace. Now, they took people and had them walk on a treadmill at 2.5 miles per hour. I mean, that's barely fast walk, maybe a jog if you're really short. For 5 to 10 minutes, just 1 or 2 times per week, decreases cardiovascular mortality by 45%. It's pretty good. Doing it every day reduces cardiovascular mortality by 50%. This is the first time they've been able to show a dose response to cardio. You do some cardio, you do it once or twice a week, you decrease your mortality by 45%. You do it every day, it's 50%. Now, obviously, the law of diminishing returns, if you just did it once or twice a week and you're getting a 45% reduction, do you really want to do it every single day and get just a 5% bump? I don't know. And then it also showed a reduction in all-cause mortality by 29%. So this is obviously pretty awesome. The chance of you walking outside and getting hit by a truck also drops by 29%. So definitely, for whatever reason, people who do cardio are healthier and more aware, better proprioception, peripheral vision, whatever it might be. It kind of helps you not die of anything else either. So this set of articles we're going to talk about now is fitness versus fatness. So since physical activity may not alter your body fat percentage that much, does it make you more fit or change your mortality? And the answer is yes. The people who are overweight but fit, their mortality is similar to normal weighted people who are also fit. So they took people who were overweight and compared them to their normal weighted cohorts, but then made them fit. They made them exercise, made them do whatever. Their cardiovascular mortality as well as all-cause mortality became the same. So they're saying that public health officials should actually focus on physical activity to improve your health as opposed to physical activity to cause weight loss. Like, we shouldn't be always focused on weight loss. We should be focused on improving your mortality, improving your blood pressure, your blood sugar, all these things, and not necessarily looking at fit activity as a way to lose weight. The next part of this is the obesity paradox. Now, if you're not familiar with the obesity paradox, there have been some studies in the past that showed that if you're a little bit overweight when you're older, you seem to live longer. Now, a lot of people have explained this away as statistical coincidences and statistical anomalies and, things that just didn't make any sense whatsoever. So there have been articles to try to figure out if I'll just read you the objective: to evaluate the influence of cardiorespiratory fitness on the obesity paradox in middle-aged men with known or suspected coronary artery disease. They found, and I highlighted this part, overweight and obese men with moderate fitness had mortality rates similar to those of the highly fit normal weight reference group. Fitness altered the obesity paradox. Overweight and obese men had increased longevity only if they registered high fitness. So again, regardless of whether or not you're overweight or normal weighted, if you are fit, let's say, how many marathon runners or, your friends that run 5Ks or play basketball on the weekends or whatever, they're overweight, but they play sports and they're pretty fit. Their mortality is similar to normal weighted people who are also fit. So make sure when you're talking to people, when you're talking to your patients or your friends or family, whatever, we're not telling them to exercise and get fit because it's going to cause a ton of weight loss. We're telling them because it's going to reduce mortality, reduce all their cardiovascular markers, etc. Now, what about cardio versus weights? This is a question I get all the time. Like, doc, what should I do? Should I do cardio or should I do weights? So we'll get into this. And I have an exercise prescription that we'll give our patients and ourselves later. Aerobic, I'll read you the conclusion. Aerobic resistance and combined training reduce total body fat and waist circumference in obese adolescents. In more adherent participants, combined training may cause greater decreases than aerobic or resistance training alone. So the thing that I'm trying to tell you is you got to do both. You can't just tell people get up and walk, or just hike or bike or run. We want them ultimately to do both, and we'll get into some of that why. Another thing on cardio versus weights. So aerobic or resistance exercise or both in dieting obese older adults. Now notice this is dieting adults. This is not people who did not diet. They are dieting, but we tried aerobic or resistance training or both. Lean mass decreased less in the combination and resistance groups than in the aerobic group. And here are the charts. If you look at the, let's go lean mass right here. If you look at the control group, lean mass did not change. The aerobic group lost lean mass. Now we know this. People who are endurance athletes, like marathoners and half marathoners, they are not as muscular as resistance training type people. So you take people who are dieting. These are people who are dieting. These are not people trying to bulk up and gain muscle. They are dieting. They're trying to lose weight. The aerobic group lost weight, but they also lost a lot more lean body mass compared to resistance or combined group. The group that did resistance training lost less lean body mass than the combined group. Now, you talk about, well, I don't want to lose lean body mass, but don't forget you're in a calorie deficit and you're dieting. If you're dieting down, you can lose both. You will lose both muscle and fat, but the way to preserve muscle mass as much as possible is to resistance train. If you want to gain muscle, you got to be in a calorie surplus. Now, I told you guys I'm not going to get into bodybuilding in this talk. We can talk about that later. Now, another thing you'll notice, bone mineral density at the total hip. The control group, their bone mineral density went up. The aerobic group lost bone mineral density. The resistance group lost less. Don't forget, these are people who are also in a calorie deficit, and the combined group was somewhere in between. Strength, obviously the aerobic group gained some strength. The resistance group gained the most, and then the combined group, just a little bit underneath the resistance group. So all this is kind of like and then here's the quality of life scores. You can look at, the combined group did the best, and there's other scoring mechanisms they use. So the point I'm trying to make is we do need both. And it depends on the patient. Some of them can't even get out of a chair. They're 400 pounds and they can't do anything. You're not going to tell them to go start lifting weights and running marathons. So the prescription, we'll get into the exercise prescription in a bit. But you need to know that if you are in a calorie deficit, you will lose lean mass as well as lean mass as well as fat. But in order to make it more fat loss than weight loss or lean mass loss, you want to add resistance training as much as possible. So again here, this is total weight change in all of these groups. The aerobic, resistance, and combined group kind of lost the same amount of weight. Remember, these are in a calorie deficit. These are not people who just exercise. They're in a calorie deficit. They're dieting adults. And this is what happened. No matter what kind of exercise they did, they lost weight. And this is obviously the control group that basically did nothing. So then we get the question of, should I do high intensity interval training or moderate intensity interval training? Moderate intensity training led to a greater improvement in overall cardiovascular fitness. Now, what is HIIT? This is like when you go for an all-out sprint for 20 seconds and then walk 2 minutes, or you run as fast as you can, or do some crazy circuit and then stop. HIIT training is that. Moderate training is like you get on a treadmill and you jog at a slow pace for an hour. There's no like burst and then stop and then burst and then stop. So the MIT, or the moderate, led to a greater improvement in overall cardiovascular fitness, which makes sense because it's almost like endurance training. You're on the treadmill at an incline, you're fast walking or lightly jogging for an hour. Your endurance will improve with that. Whereas a HIIT, where you sprint all out for 10, 15 seconds and then stop, that's more like strength training or muscle building. So that's why they found the differences there. So now, what about after a heart attack or after stenting or after CABG? What can we tell our patients? These are cardiac patients. So this study looked at resistance training in patients who did cardiac rehab. They looked at resistance training versus aerobic training in cardiac rehabilitation. The conclusion was combined training, and this is both, is more effective than aerobic training in improving body composition, strength, and some indicators of cardiovascular fitness, and does not compromise study completion or safety when compared to aerobic training. Now, the vast majority of cardiac rehab is basically aerobic. They get on a treadmill, they walk, they got the EKG leads on, we're seeing how they do, or on a bike or some kind of machine. That's mostly aerobic training. Now, they wanted to see, well, what happens if we add some resistance training? They found that it's safe. None of the participants quit. None of them got injured. It was safe. It was, people stayed in the study and kept doing it, and nothing bad happened. But they did have better body composition. They lost fat and gained muscle. They gained some strength. And as you know, strength translates into everything. They can now get out of a chair. They can get up and go to the bathroom, regular everyday strength. They can put things overhead, whatever it might be. And it improves some aspects of cardiovascular fitness. So the thing is, we want to tell our cardiac patients not to be afraid of safe resistance training. Do the cardiac rehab and then slowly add weights and strength training, get stronger, your quality of life improves, your body fat percentage goes down, your muscle mass goes up, your body composition looks better. So we definitely want to do that. Now, is there such a thing as too much cardio, or is too much cardio bad? Well, sure, too much of anything can be really, really bad. There are studies, and here's the Mayo Clinic proceedings. I'm not going to read the entire details, but people who do intense exercise, like these ultra marathoners and all that, they do have increased mortality, cardiovascular mortality and non-cardiovascular mortality. They even have a 5-fold presence of AFib. They have electrolyte imbalances. In another study, they showed that their coronary artery calcium score is actually higher. People who run more and are more doing way more excessive in long distance cardio have higher coronary artery calcium scores. But maybe I'll read some of these to you. People who exercise regularly have markedly lower rates of disability and mean life expectancy is 7 years longer than others. However, a safe upper dose limit potentially exists beyond which the adverse effects of exercise may outweigh its benefits. So if you're not active and you start being active, you live longer, but after a certain point, you actually could be hurting your health, or your mortality goes up. Chronic intense and sustained exercise can cause patchy myocardial fibrosis, particularly in the atria, intraventricular septum, and right ventricle, creating a substrate for atrial and ventricular arrhythmias. Chronic excessive sustained exercise may also be associated with coronary artery calcification, diastolic dysfunction, and large artery wall stiffening. Veteran endurance athletes in sports such as marathon or ultramarathon running or professional cycling have been noted to have 5-fold increase in the prevalence of atrial fibrillation. Intense endurance exercise efforts often cause elevation in biomarkers of myocardial injury like troponin and BNP, which were correlated with transient reductions in RV ejection fraction. So there is such a thing as excessive exercise. A patient of yours comes in and says, "Hey doc, I started running ultra marathons and doing all," like, whoa, slow down. That does not mean you're healthier. In fact, carried out to an extreme could be also unhealthy and bad for your heart. Another study running the risk of coronary events, prevalence, and prognostic relevance of coronary atherosclerosis in marathon runners. Conclusion: conventional cardiovascular risk stratification underestimates the coronary artery calcium burden in presumably healthy marathon runners, as coronary artery calcium burden and frequent marathon running seem to correlate with subclinical myocardial damage, and increased awareness of potentially higher than anticipated coronary risk is warranted. And there's other studies that have shown 27 times increase, or 27% increase in coronary artery calcium in ultra marathoners or people who are like extreme endurance athletes. So, the only reason I'm bringing this up is because you can't, if a patient comes up to you and he's like, doc, I'm thinking of taking up marathoning or ultra marathoning, like, no, please don't. Just start with something simple, some moderate intensity thing. That's not the way to lose weight, and in fact can be dangerous if you carry it out to an extreme. So don't encourage that. There's all kinds of things we will tell patients to do, but that shouldn't be one of them. Now, bone loss. Increases in lean mass from resistance plus impact training were greatest among women currently taking aromatase inhibitors compared to controls not on this therapy. Our combined program of resistance plus impact exercises reduced risk factors for fracture among postmenopausal brain cancer women. Now, this is something we've known for a long time. One of the few ways to reverse osteopenia or osteopenia, the word escapes me now. But reduced bone mineral density in women is actually strength training. So we want people to do that more. And this was just a study on, people with breast cancer that are on certain hormonal medications. Aging, they have found that lifting weights is like the fountain of youth, along with mobility and flexibility training, lifting weights, and even some endurance training can give you a younger virtual age or relative age compared to your cohorts that don't endurance train or resistance train. Actually, it's resistance training. So what about losing weight fast or slow? They have found that the slower you lose weight, the more likely it is to be from fat. So if you're losing weight very, very quickly, you will lose more lean body mass, bone mineral density, that kind of stuff. We don't want to lose muscle. We want to lose just fat. Now, this was done on athletes, but this has been done on regular everyday people as well. The slower you lose weight, we recommend about 0.5 to 1% of your body weight total. So if you're a 200-pound person, that's like 1, maybe 2 pounds per week. The more you weigh, obviously it's a little bit more than that, but you want to lose weight slowly, and we'll get into your calorie deficits and how to set all that stuff up so that we can figure out how to lose weight safely while preserving lean mass as much as possible. Although if you are in a calorie deficit, you will lose some lean mass, but there are ways to protect it and prevent it. Now, this is a study that was done on 12 weeks of aerobic resistance or combined exercise training on cardiovascular risk factors in the overweight and obese population. Now, the only reason I bring these up is because of these graphs. If you look at body fat, the control group gained some. The aerobic group lost, obviously, body fat. The resistance training group did not lose as much, but the combined group lost the most. Same thing here when it comes to body fat. The combined group lost the most. Same thing when it comes to BMI. The combined group improved the most. Same thing when it comes to android fat. The combined group did the best. VO2 max, this is like how well you process oxygen or how much your cardiovascular fitness or endurance is. The combined group actually was better than the aerobic group, and the resistance group was actually better than the aerobic group. So the more muscle you have or the more resistance training you do, for whatever reason, your VO2 max actually improves. The group that did nothing, obviously, it went down or made no difference. So what kind of exercise? So just as an example, I like to tell my patients this all the time. Assuming you weigh 200 pounds, you can go on the treadmill for 3 miles and you'll burn about 300 calories. A 200-pound person squatting their own body weight for 2 minutes also burns about 300 calories. Now, you can also not eat the plain bagel with cheese, which is also about 300 calories. So you could spend about 40 to 50 minutes on a treadmill, 2 minutes of squats, or not eat that plain bagel with cheese. There's different ways to attack that calorie deficit and make it go away. This is just as an example. Now, exercise, once again, weights and resistance training is much more effective than running on a treadmill because you increase your BMR. The more muscle mass you put on, the more your body needs calories to maintain its current body weight. Your body weight, and especially lean mass, correlates the most with BMR. So if you want your basic metabolic rate to go up, you need more muscle. So it doesn't even have to be a lot. Even just 5 pounds of muscle, if you put that on, you'll notice a huge increase in the amount of calories you can eat or more weight loss at this current caloric intake. Explosive runs and sprints are actually muscle building. This is obviously especially true, the resistance training part, for women with low metabolism or need to increase their bone density with osteoporosis or osteopenia. Osteoporosis, that was the word I was looking for. And then what I always tell people is lift weights to burn calories. Sure, aerobic exercise, treadmill, cardio for a certain amount of time will burn some, but your body adapts quickly and you can only really burn about 5%. That's your exercise activity thermogenesis. You're not going to affect your TDEE by a whole lot. But if you put on some muscle, 5 pounds in a few months, maybe 10, 15 in a year, you can actually increase your BMR quite significantly, or at least significantly enough that it actually makes a difference. So weight training versus cardio. Anyone can weightlift. Not everyone can run or swim or bike or jog. Some people have amputations. Some people are 400 pounds, whatever it might be. Not all of our patients can actually do cardio, but all of them can probably lift something. Now that might be just getting out of a chair, lifting a 5-pound dumbbell, starting with something really low, just walking, doing lunges, just something simple. Almost anyone can lift weights. The nice thing about resistance training is it's very adaptable to the person that is doing it. You got a little old lady, she can start with a 2-pound dumbbell or a 3-pound dumbbell, or whatever it might be. But some people can't walk or run or bike or jog or whatever it might be. So you got to be very, very aware of that. The other advantage to weight training is that it improves your BMR, increases your BMR. We talked about this already. It increases your strength, your mobility, your quality of life, because you can now get out of the chair and walk to the bathroom. It improves your body composition. You lose fat and gain muscle, you look a lot nicer. And it improves your overall functionality. You can do more. How nice would it be to be able to get up and do things that you couldn't do before? You got to think of these things when you are telling patients what to do and giving them advice. Okay, next slide. So this is just a graphic I like to show people. This person did diet and cardio only. So they lost body fat, but they also lost muscle mass. This person did diet plus weights. They lost body fat, but they may have gained muscle mass as well, and or not gained muscle. But now you can actually see the underlying muscles. Same thing kind of goes for women. I'm going to skip this one because we're kind of running out of time. So my exercise prescription for patients is usually something that includes cardio and resistance training. As you've seen, both are very, very important. You want to start at an appropriate intensity. You definitely don't want to take someone who's been a couch potato and completely inactive and just having them start running like crazy or lifting weights like crazy. You want them to start kind of slow. Today, walk for 2 minutes. If that's all you can do, fine. Tomorrow, make it 4 minutes. The next day, add another minute or two. Just work your way up slowly, especially some of our patients that are like 300-400 pounds. They are not going to get up and walk for 15 minutes or jog a mile. That's just not going to happen. So don't give them something that's unrealistic, where they walk away thinking that you're an unrealistic physician and are out of touch with reality. So tell them to start with something appropriate, something simple and basic. Ask them, did it bother you to walk in here from the car, or did you take the elevator? How far can you go without having to stop to catch your breath? Do you mow the lawn? And then just kind of judge it from there. You also initially want them to start with more cardio in the beginning. And you also want them to start with something they enjoy. You don't want to make this like something that impedes their happiness or is like completely ridiculous. If they like walking the dog, have them walk the dog. If they like golfing, have them golf. If they like hiking, have them hike. Don't tell them to do something that they don't actually like or that they're not already used to. If they tell you, hey, look, doc, I've been going to the gym, I just get on the elliptical, or I like to swim for an hour, or just jump in the pool, fine. Any activity is better than no activity. Now, please don't mislead them and tell them, oh, you're going to lose so much weight if you start swimming. It's not going to happen. We've discussed that and shown all the articles, but tell them the activity helps improve your appetite control, reduces your blood pressure, reduces your insulin resistance, and all that kind of stuff, and your mortality, obviously. So be reasonable. Start with more cardio in the beginning, and then as time goes on, you want to transition them into more resistance training and start adding weights. And it could be as simple as like reaching down and picking up a pencil off the ground, and then getting out of a chair, and then sitting back down again, then getting out of the chair again. Whatever it is, they have to do something that involves resistance training. Now, obviously, our younger patients that are maybe like, let's say 55 and younger, and I'm not trying to discriminate by age. There are plenty of 65-year-olds that go to the gym and work out every day, but let's say our 30 to 55-year-olds that are 60 to 100 pounds overweight, maybe, they could probably go to a gym, hire a personal trainer, or find somebody that knows what they're talking about and get right into resistance training with the cardio and do very well. They'll notice their back doesn't hurt as much. They might not snore as much at night. Lots of things improve when you start doing that. As time goes on, you want to transition more resistance training over time. So you want them, as time goes on, to start doing more and more resistance training. And the nice thing about resistance training is your body doesn't adapt to it, because if it does, you just increase the weight. Let's say you're bench pressing 100 pounds. If it starts getting easy and you're doing it 20 to 30 times, and it's too easy, you can increase the weight to 110 or 120 or whatever it might be. So your body can't really adapt to that. You want them to adapt over time. Start with the low intensity cardio, work your way up, start doing some strength training, et cetera, and adapt over time. If it starts getting easy and it's too simple, you can make it a harder and harder program until you get better and better at it. Does anyone have any questions up until this point? I do have the chat window open, and I've been looking to see. No one has asked any questions yet, but you can unmute your mics now and ask some questions, and I'll answer them. All right, so we'll move on to the next slide. This is a slide that I like to share that shows that the amount of energy being burned and where it comes from. So at low energy, low intensity exercise, 80% of the energy you're using comes from fat and a little bit from glycogen. If you're doing this high intensity type training that we discussed earlier, most of the energy you're using is coming from glycogen and very little from fat. Somewhere in the moderate range, you're using both. Now, when you're walking on the treadmill at an incline at like 2 miles an hour, you are burning more calories from fat, but it's not that many calories. If you're doing high intensity training, you're burning more calories from glycogen, but it's a lot of calories. So there is a trade-off. Excuse me. There is a trade-off. Somewhere in the middle seems to be the sweet point where you're not killing yourself with high intensity training, but you're also not bored just walking. But some people are very happy just walking on a treadmill, burning off a few extra calories of low intensity. The nice thing about incline walking is that your body can't really adapt to it because it thinks you're just kind of doing what you normally do. You're just walking. You're just getting in your steps almost, and you're just walking. Your body doesn't really adapt to low intensity, steady state cardio, at least not as much. If you're doing very high intensity or moderate, like you're jogging and running all the time, your body does adapt to that. And that's one of the things we try to avoid. This next chart shows that the longer you're in this exercise, the more likely you are to use fat versus carbohydrate. When you first sprint or a really short type of exercise, you use more glycogen. If you're on a treadmill, very, very slow state, you're using eventually more fat depending on how long you stay on it. So my next question to you guys, and as cardiology fellows and physicians, you guys should know this answer. So is it just a matter of calories in versus calories out? That's what we call KICO or CICO, CICO. Calories in, calories out. Is it just a matter of calories in versus calories out? I hope that by now you guys know the answer. Now, weight loss, like I said, 95 to 97% can be achieved with diet alone. Exercise is good for cardiovascular health, but not necessary for weight loss. Now, the problem that I see all the time with physicians like us and you guys is we always tell patients the only way to lose weight is diet and exercise. You see this in all of our progress notes. It says diet and exercise, diet and exercise, diet and exercise. So now the problem with this statement, when you tell patients and exercise, they think that the only way to lose weight is if they do exercise. Sure, they could change their diet. Anybody could do that. But the and exercise part is the problem. They see the and exercise and they think there's no way to lose weight unless I exercise or have time to exercise or can actually get out of a chair and exercise. So they have an excuse now to think they can never lose weight because they can't really exercise. So you don't want to give patients a built-in excuse like, I can't exercise, there's no way I can lose weight. You don't want to have people think that, because then they think they can't do anything. We don't want that. We want them to know that you can lose weight with diet only. And as you lose weight, like if you're really morbidly obese or super obese, lose weight first with diet and then slowly start adding the activity. Like we have patients that are 400 pounds sometimes that can't get out of a chair. Well, you can't tell them, well, get out of a chair every day and start walking. They're going to think you're crazy. But what you can do is you can say to them, why don't we start with diet? Just cut back your calories, do this, do that, whatever it is. We'll get into the diet stuff later. Start with diet, lose 20, 25 pounds, 30 maybe, and then you're breathing better. You can get up and do more. You're not as short of breath. Now we can start adding the activity. That's kind of how you need to approach that. So back to the question, is it just calories in versus calories out? No, it is just calories in. As you notice, the total daily energy expenditure, 5% was calories out, the exercise energy thermogenesis, the EAT, the exercise activity thermogenesis. You can't really change that 5% by that much. Sure, some people use only 1%, maybe 5, maybe 7 at the most, but you can't really change that part by that much. So the calories out part needs to be taken out. There's not a lot you can do to change calories out, but there's a whole lot you can do to change calories in. 70% of your total daily energy expenditure is your BMR, which directly correlates to your lean body mass or overall body mass. So that 70% you can easily play with. You can take out 20, 25% of your calories or 50% of your calories, whatever it might be. You can totally play with that part, the calories in. You can fast. Some people go on these fasts, whatever you want to do, you can make that part change. It's super easy to change calories in. You cannot change calories out. So that's kind of the point we're getting at. We do want you to be active for various reasons, but that part is hard to affect, the calories out. Now, the case for more muscle. A lot of people say, well, I don't want to look like a bodybuilder. Why should I gain muscle or lift weights? First of all, you're not going to look like a bodybuilder. It is very hard to look like a bodybuilder. Trust me, I did that and I do that and I train these people. I train bodybuilders all the time. A normal, average, everyday person is not going to look like a bodybuilder. And women always complain, well, I don't want to look bulky. You're not going to look bulky. You're going to look lean and toned, and you're going to like how you look. If you care about how you look. If you don't care and you just want to be healthy, then you can do this even less. But what we want is muscle for other reasons. Now, muscle, number one, protects against cardiovascular mortality, protects against cancers, protects against chronic illness, and shortens length of stay in the ICU. There's been a lot of studies now showing that someone with more lean body mass ends up staying in the ICU for a lot less, and it's more protective. And they, whether it's sepsis or whatever they have, for whatever reason, they do better when they have more muscle mass, or they're leaner. Maybe they don't have a ton of muscle, but they're not that obese. So some conclusions on cardiovascular risk, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later. Obesity and elevated BMI increases all inflammatory and cardiovascular risk factors. Calorie deficit and weight loss improve all cardiovascular risk factors. Macronutrient breakdown, if you don't know what macronutrients are, that's like carbs, fat, protein, makes no difference. And then leaner individuals have less cardiovascular risk. We'll get into the details of this later, but this is just kind of a quick summary. So once again, calories out, very difficult to change this. Don't eat back the calories that you burn off. If your watch tells you burn 500 calories, don't go eat them back. In fact, I tell most people to disconnect their calorie tracking app from their fitness tracking app. It doesn't matter if you exercise or took 20,000 steps today, you're not going to eat those calories back. We really don't know how much we are burning off, and it is usually capped. None of those fitness trackers are accurate. It's been shown they can be off in studies, they've shown that it can be off by as much as 20% and all the way up to 80%. So if it's telling you burn 1,000 calories, it might only be 200. It might be 800. We don't know. It's very, very inaccurate. And it's also capped. Like we said, you cannot run for 18 hours a day and burn 18,000 calories a day. It's capped. Your body isn't going to let you do that. Now, there is this thing called body recomposition. If you are in a calorie deficit, we're always afraid that you're going to lose muscle and fat, right? It's kind of what we've been talking about. Now, there is a group of people, there's 4 categories of people who in a calorie deficit can gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. Normally bodybuilders and, people who are doing that kind of stuff, you either go on a bulking phase where you eat more calories than you need so you can build muscle, and then which you'll gain some fat too, and you try to shave off the fat later, or they go into a cutting phase or a leaning out phase where they cut their calories and they try to shave off fat, but they will lose some lean muscle too. There is a group of people that can do both at the same time, and you're kind of lucky if you fit into one of these categories in the beginning, but then it kind of all evens out. Now, the number one category is people who are obese. People who are quite obese, if they're in a calorie deficit, will be losing weight, but also gaining muscle, assuming you're actually lifting weights and training hard. Next group of people are those who are new to training. If you've never lifted weights before and you start lifting weights, you can also do this in a calorie deficit. Next is the group we call deconditioned lifters. These are people that used to lift weights a long time ago, haven't done it in a year or so, and they're back to it, sort of like new to training people. And then obviously people who are on anabolic steroids. They gain tons of muscle and lose lots of fat in a deficit or whatever. We're not going to get into that. The top 3 groups are probably the ones most of our patients or ourselves fit into. So any questions on exercise before we get into diet? This is your last chance. I'll put it in the chat, or just unmute yourself and I'll answer your questions. Okay, so let's talk diet. I'll put all the questions at the end. So back in 1943, this was kind of the U.S. government's suggested diet guidelines. Eat a little bit of every group of these 7 foods every day. Eventually in 92, they evolved into a pyramid, lots of grains and carbs at the bottom, some meat and dairy at the top, fruits and vegetables in the middle. Later, they made the pyramid kind of sideways, where they had all these groups here, a little bit of oil. It's very thin in here, but you see kind of all these things there. They also added a running person running up a staircase on the side. Now, the reason and the thought process for this, which is actually good, is they wanted to encourage activity. This is about the time, if you notice, in the 2000s, late 90s, when obesity started hitting like record levels. So they wanted to stress this. And it does help. It's obviously not going to cause substantial weight loss, but it does help with other things. And they figured maybe if people are out doing more things, they're not sitting at home eating as much. During the Obama administration, they came up with this thing called My Plate. And this is probably close to what people should be eating. Maybe not as much dairy. They've got like a milk cup here. But this is pretty close to about what we want people to eat. You got protein, a little bit of fat here, and then a lot of different kinds of carbs, fruits, vegetables, complex, maybe not so complex, whatever it is. But this is not bad. But obviously, who reads these and does this? Let's go over diets really quickly. There's portion control style diets like Weight Watchers, zone diets, calorie counting, whatever. Prepared food diets like Nutrisystem, Jenny Craig, they just ship you your food. You pay a monthly fee. There's other ones now that are fancier. You pay them a fee and they ship you the food. There's low carb, high protein style diets like Atkins, South Beach, keto, etc. There's these liquid food type diets, which can be dangerous sometimes. You just eat cabbage soup for 3 months or whatever. Mediterranean diet, this is the most proven in a lot of different ways. We'll go over that. There's these raw food style diets like paleo, hallelujah, God diet, caveman diet. The God diet is like if God didn't create it, don't eat it. The hallelujah diet's the same. Caveman is like foods that were available back in the caveman times, kind of like paleo, the Paleolithic period where food was available then. The glycemic index type diets, intermittent fasting or like time restricted diets. And then these like elimination diets where you eliminate certain foods and see how your body reacts. Now, I will say all diets work for a certain amount of time. Every single one of these things I have on here will work and can work. And it works for a certain amount of time, but then some of them are hard to do. Some of them are too complicated. Some of them you just can't do it long term, become eventually dangerous. So the studies that we're going to go over and discuss talk about why these may not be the best. Now, my biggest problem with some of these people online is they're like, oh, you got to do this diet. This is the only diet that works. Intermittent fasting, that's it. Nothing else works. Or keto, that's it. Nothing else works. No, that's not true. If that was true, then everybody on earth would be obese or like could never lose weight. That's just not the case. So don't be one of those super dogmatic people that thinks it's this way or no other way works. All of these do work. Even the dangerous liquid diet fad stuff that's dangerous and unhealthy, they do work. But studies have shown us or have revealed which ones work the best long term or have the best outcomes or are more sustainable. We'll get into that later with all the different studies, and then I'll go over what you should probably be telling your patients. So here's just like a graphic. You find this online all the time. The name of the diet, short description of it, and then how does it actually work? It works by creating a calorie deficit. Every single one of these diets creates a calorie deficit in some way, shape, or form. Now, there's nothing fancy about it, but every single one of these diets, you end up in a calorie deficit, which means you're eating less calories than you normally do, and you lose weight. Calorie deficit. So what's a calorie deficit? You must be in a calorie deficit regardless of how you achieve it or what you call it. You can call it this diet, that diet, whatever you want to call it. You need to be in a calorie deficit. If you're not in a calorie deficit, you're not going to be losing weight. Sometimes I have a patient named Bruce or a patient named Leslie, and I'll tell him or her, you need to be on the Bruce diet or the Leslie diet. This is foods that you like to eat, that you've been eating for the last 20, 30 years, but it just has to be a lot less than what you've been eating. And adherence and studies we'll go over show that if people are eating what they enjoy and what they like, they're more likely to stick to that diet. And we'll go over all these studies. You guys are going to love this. So, first study, 2007, fat loss depends on energy deficit only, independent of the method for weight loss. This, I highlighted some of this, diet alone or diet combined with aerobic training. This study showed that independently of the method for weight loss, the negative energy balance alone is responsible for weight reduction. So this was a very well done study. Like I said, there's lots of very well done studies. This showed that whether you did exercise or not, how much exercise you did or how much you didn't do, that the only thing that caused weight loss was your calorie deficit. No questions about it. You can put a period at the end of the sentence. The calorie deficit alone is what caused the weight loss, regardless of anything else. A next study showed a randomized trial comparing low fat and low carbohydrate diets matched for energy and protein. So the people who support low carb diets like keto, Atkins, South Beach, whatever, they've always done these studies to show, oh, look, low carb diets work and they're better and, whatever. But they've never actually done studies where they keep calories the same. Okay, do low carb, eat only 1,800 calories a day. I'll do low fat and eat only 1,800 calories a day. We'll keep protein the same because if you don't maintain protein, you lose muscle mass, and you don't want to do that. Plus, protein helps satiate you. You feel more full. So it depresses your appetite a little. So they wanted to answer the question is, what if we kept protein the same, kept calories the same? You guys eat all fat, we'll eat all carbs, and let's see what happens. So the conclusion is, our results showed no significant weight loss, lipid, serum insulin, or glucose differences between the two diets. Lipids were dramatically reduced on both diets, with a trend for greater triglyceride reduction in the very low carb diet. Glucose levels were also reduced on both sides, with a trend for insulin reduction on the very low carb diet. If you keep calories and protein the same, it makes no difference if you eat a very low carb or low fat diet. You will lose the same amount of weight. When it comes to weight loss, they both lost the same amount of weight. They have shown in other studies too that there's a little bit of a difference in the lipid profiles, but after they've been at it a long enough time, past the 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is, those balance out and they're all the same, and we'll show those studies as well. So what is this? Anybody know? Yeah, good. Somebody answered in the chat. This is called a Twinkie. This is a Twinkie, and why would I put a Twinkie on this slide? Right. So there is something called the Twinkie diet, and we'll get into that right now. There's something called the Twinkie diet. So there's the head of nutrition at Kansas State University. His name is Dr. Mark Haub. He's a PhD. He's the head of nutrition. He was trying to lose weight. He was eating about 2,600 calories a day, and he's overweight and wanted to lose weight. He was at lunch one day with his colleagues, and they saw him eating a Twinkie. And they're like, "Doc, what are you doing? You're eating a Twinkie. How are you going to lose weight eating Twinkies?" He looked at them and said, "I can lose weight eating Twinkies." They said, "No, you can't." He said, I'll prove it to you. Watch, follow me around, see what I do. So he reduced his calories to 1,800 calories a day for 10 weeks. He did make sure that he got 100 grams of protein a day. He would drink a shake of 100 grams of protein because he didn't want to lose muscle mass. And it's dangerous if you don't eat enough protein. So he made sure he did get 100 grams of protein a day, which is 400 calories. The other 1,400 calories were Little Debbie snacks, Twinkies, Oreos, Doritos, and all kinds of junk food, ice cream, whatever. He lost 27 pounds in those 10 weeks eating, quote unquote, this junk. But not only that, even better, he had a 20% reduction in his LDL. HDL went up 20%, and triglycerides were down almost 40%. All of the inflammatory markers improved. Your CRP, IL-1, IL-6, uric acid, all that stuff improved. The point we're trying to make here is that if you lower your calories, you technically could eat almost anything you want. We will highly stress eating protein and getting enough protein, and we'll go over the calculations later of how much you need. But if you eat fewer calories than you need, and we'll get into those calculations too, you will lose weight and all your cardiovascular markers will improve. So just as a aside, I'm not recommending that anyone eat just Twinkies, but if you want to, it could be anything. You might like, I don't know, samosas, bratwurst, cheeseburgers, French fries, whatever horrible thing you think you're eating, this junk food. If you like it and you want to eat it, as long as you stay within your calorie limits, you can and will lose weight. Now, this is a study that states exactly what I just said. Comparison of weight loss diets with different compositions of fat, protein, and carbohydrates. Here, they took all these different combinations of fat, protein, carbohydrates, broke them down, but they put everyone in a calorie deficit. And they did find that reduced calorie diets result in clinically meaningful weight loss, regardless of which macronutrients they emphasize. So whether you ate mostly carbs, mostly fat, mostly protein, as long as you were in a calorie deficit, you lost weight. Doesn't matter what you emphasized, how much of it you ate or didn't eat, whatever it was, you will lose weight if you eat the right amount of calories, or I should say a lower amount of calories than you need. And they did this study for 2 years. It's a very long, very well done study. Now, diet versus combinations of fat, protein, and carbohydrates, also a very well done study. The specific composition of macronutrients, whether fat, protein, or carbohydrates in diets, is not important for cardiovascular risk reduction as long as the diet is effective in causing weight loss. Now, this has been shown across the board in every single study. If you're losing weight, regardless of how you're losing weight, regardless of what you're eating and whether it's Twinkies or protein or whatever, if you're losing weight, you will improve your cardiovascular risk factors. So when patients tell me, "Doc, I feel bad. I'm eating junk food and all this, and I can't stop." Okay, well, just eat less of it. If weight is coming off, you'll do fine. Just eat a lot less. Very low carbohydrate versus isocaloric high carbohydrate diet in dietary obese rats. Now, this was obviously a rat study, but they have also shown it in human studies, and I have tons of links to even more articles on that at the end. When energy intake was matched, the very low carb, high fat diet provided no advantage in weight loss or improving those components of the metabolic syndrome induced by dietary obesity, and may delay loss of hepatic and visceral fat as compared with a high carb, low fat diet. So they did find in the end that if the calories were equated, that there really wasn't a whole lot of difference in the amount of weight loss. No difference in body weight decrease between low glycemic index and high glycemic index diet, but reduce LDL cholesterol after 10 weeks ad libitum intake of the low glycemic diet. So a lot of patients come and say, Doc, well, I was told by my registered dietitian or my friend or whoever it is that I'm supposed to eat foods with a low glycemic index and that those are better for me. So when you match calories, it didn't matter if you ate high glycemic index foods or low glycemic index foods. The conclusion, the study does not support the contention that low glycemic index food diets are more beneficial than high glycemic food diets with regard to appetite or body weight regulation over 12 weeks. So that's just another study that showed the same thing. If you control calories, you will lose weight regardless of whether they're highly processed Twinkies or asparagus, broccoli, sweet potatoes, whatever. The glycemic index, if you don't know what it is how much of a sugar spike the food causes when you eat it. The highest is like white sugar, white bread, white potatoes, blah, 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 Pop-Tarts, things like that. They raise your blood sugar the most. Things that don't are like asparagus, broccoli, kale, lettuce, blueberries, oranges. Things that are in the middle are, like multigrain stuff. That's just in case you don't know what that stands for. But eating highly processed foods, as long as you're within your calorie limits versus not so processed, you will still lose the same amount of weight. No effect of a diet with reduced glycemic index on satiety, energy intake, and body weight in overweight and obese women. Conclusion, the study provides no evidence to support an effect of a reduced glycemic index diet on satiety, energy intake, or body weight in overweight and obese women. Claims that the glycemic index of the diet per se, may have specific effects on body weight, may therefore be misleading. Another study showing the same thing. Ketogenic low-carbohydrate diets have no metabolic advantage over non-ketogenic low-carbohydrate diets. No significant difference in weight loss or insulin resistance. Low-fat keto caused several adverse metabolic and emotional effects. The group that did keto withdrew from the study more because they couldn't handle it, and it caused all kinds of psychological distress. So once again, ketogenic diet versus non-ketogenic diet, no difference in weight loss or insulin resistance. As long as weight is coming off, then you will lose the same amount of weight and have the same reduction in insulin resistance and cardiovascular risk factors. So what about Jenny Craig and these commercial programs that cost a lot of money and you pay for it? Studies have shown, this is a meta-analysis, with the exception of one trial of Weight Watchers, the evidence to support the use of major commercial and self-help weight loss programs is suboptimal. Weight Watchers is basically almost a calorie counting style diet where you get points for certain foods. One study showed that worked, but the rest of the stuff, no studies showed that it was any better than anything else. And the programs are actually suboptimal, that they actually may not have even worked at all. Do dietary supplements and alternative medicine work? This is like acupuncture, hypnosis, all these weight loss pills and fat burners. A study from 2014, they do not enhance weight loss attempts. I'm not going to read all of it. You guys can go through it. So what's the healthiest diet? You want the short answer, it's the Mediterranean diet. Mediterranean diet has been linked to a number of health benefits, including reduced mortality risk, lower incidence of cardiovascular disease. The next study, significant reduction in new cancers and overall mortality. The next study, our results showed no significant weight loss, lipid, serum, or glucose differences. This is a randomized trial comparing low-fat and low-carb diets matched for energy and protein, sort of like what we were talking about earlier. There was no difference in weight loss, lipid, serum, insulin, or glucose differences between the two diets. So if weight is coming off, regardless of what you're eating, you will do fine and all your cardiovascular factors improve. So cardiovascular risk, once again, changes in weight loss, body composition, and cardiovascular disease risk after altering macronutrient distributions during a regular exercise program in obese women. Conclusions, I highlighted it. Regardless of what macronutrient breakdown you use, if you are losing weight, all of your cardiovascular risk factors improve. And you're welcome to read this study as well. So what about red meat? Obviously, I'm a cardiologist, and people want to know, what are my thoughts on red meat? Can we eat red meat? Can we eat saturated fat? Well, there's all these people online that you read about, they're talking about, saturated fat this and saturated fat that and red meat this and red meat that. There was actually a group, I forgot who did, they published this new guideline. Nobody asked them to publish a guideline, but they recently published a guideline stating that, saturated fat may not be as dangerous as we once thought. And of course, they just looked at studies that compared somebody eating 10% of their calories from saturated fat versus 8%. which is both are super low, and you're not going to see a difference in cardiovascular disease when it's already that low. They looked at people eating 10-12% of their calories from saturated fat compared to people eating 7-8%, and there is no difference because it's very low. But when you looked at people eating 25% versus 7, 8, 9, 10%, there was a tremendous difference. And it also depends on your BMI, how lean you are, how fat you are, and we'll get into some of those studies in a second here. But you need to know about this since you're going to be a cardiologist. So let me be clear once again, as a cardiologist, you guys are cardiologists in training or whatever kind of physician you are. You need to know the science on red meat, saturated fat, and you need to know what to tell people. And you need to be able to articulate it very clearly and with confidence. This group in October of 2019 that came out saying, well, there's not really a whole lot of difference between people that eat more saturated fat or less saturated fat. All they looked at was people still who ate very low levels of saturated fat. So they cannot make those claims. No one even really asked them to come out with a new set of guidelines. I'm not sure why they did this, but it's very misleading. And unfortunately, even a lot of cardiologists were forwarding me this article saying, hey, Dr. Allah, what do you think of this? They're saying that saturated fat intake had no effect on cardiovascular disease. So you need to be clear on this, and you need to know your studies. So dietary red and processed meat intake and markers of adiposity and inflammation, the multi-ethnic cohort study. They looked at the effects of red and processed meat. The current data suggests that the amount of excess body weight or the degree of adiposity may mediate the relations between dietary red and processed meat intake and serum biomarkers associated with obesity and inflammation. Now, what does this mean? I kind of concluded it at the bottom. If you are overweight, the amount of red meat and saturated fat will affect your cardiovascular risk. Now, this is not to say that super lean individuals, it doesn't affect them. The studies have shown that if you are super lean, red meat intake and saturated fat intake is not as bad as if you are overweight. Most of our patients are overweight. So if you are overweight or obese, red meat intake, saturated fat intake, butter, bacon, cheese. So first of all, let's backtrack a little. What is saturated fat? Saturated fat is any fat that's solid at room temperature. These are mostly animal fats. Butter, bacon, cheese, chicken skin. Milk is tricky because it looks liquid, but it's really lipid particles in a suspension of liquid. But it's butter, bacon, cheese, coconut oil. Yes, coconut oil. Any fat that's solid at room temperature is a saturated fat. Now, if you are overweight and obese, the more saturated fat you eat, the worse your cardiovascular risk factors are, as measured by, some of these things that they mentioned in the articles here. Serum levels of leptin, adiponectin, C-reactive protein, tumor necrosis factor, interleukin-6, and other mediators of BMI and all the inflammatory markers. So definitely we know that the more overweight you are, the less you can get away with. Same thing with smoking. If you are quite overweight, smoking is going to be a huge, huge problem for you. If you are leaner, it's still a huge, huge problem, just not as much. Now, with smoking, it's a little different because any amount of smoking is still horrible. But with red meat and saturated fat, we have found that if you are leaner, you could probably eat a little bit more than your obese or overweight counterparts. Now, we're still not talking like huge amounts of saturated fat. We still recommend less than 10% of total calories come from saturated fat. The more under that number, the better your cardiovascular risk factors look. Now, that's why that group that looked at saturated fat didn't find a whole lot of difference. They're comparing people at 10% to 8%, and that's not the correct comparison group. Another study, effects of total red meat intake on glycemic control and inflammatory biomarkers, a meta-analysis of randomized control studies. Now, this looked at 24 articles out of the 1,100 some odd articles they found. And this meta-analysis showed, and meta-analyses are pretty awesome because you can compare a lot of studies in huge populations. Now, what I highlighted here, a cohort study examined the relationship between red meat, BMI, and inflammatory markers, including CRP, TNF-alpha, and IL-6 in 1,223 subjects. They did indeed find that red meat intake was associated with markers of inflammation. Yes. However, when they corrected for differences in BMI, the associations between red meat and inflammatory markers were no longer significant, while the associations between BMI and inflammation were. Once again, highlighting what I said earlier. If you correct for BMI, like lean individuals, if you took a whole bunch of lean individuals, some ate this much saturated fat, some ate a little more, some ate a little less, your cardiovascular marker didn't go up as much as if you took a cohort of people BMI 30 or 35 or 40, 45, 50, whatever it is. The more obese, the more overweight you were, the more your inflammatory markers went up with saturated fat intake. They're using red meat as a proxy for saturated fat. So that's definitely very, very important to know. So a lot of people come up to me like, listen, Dr. Allo, I'm a bodybuilder. I work out every day. My body fat percentage is like 10%. I'm super lean. Can I eat a ribeye every once in a while? Sure. You can eat a ribeye every once in a while if you don't smoke, don't have a history of heart disease and whatnot. Can I eat eggs every day? Well, eggs don't have a lot of saturated fat, but they contain cholesterol. And as we know, dietary cholesterol is really not a thing. It doesn't affect your overall cholesterol very much, but saturated fat does. And that's why we're focusing on saturated fat right now. The next study, this is a huge study. This is almost 500,000 people in the UK. Meat consumption and risk of 25 common conditions, outcome-wide analysis of 475,000 men and women in the UK Biobank study. You can read the details if you want to look this up. Conclusions. Higher unprocessed red meat, processed meat, and poultry meat consumption was associated with higher risk of several common conditions. Higher BMI accounted for a substantial proportion of these increased risks, suggesting that residual confounding or mediation by adiposity might account for some of these remaining associations. Higher unprocessed red meat and poultry meat consumption was associated with lower IDA risk. So, iron and IDA, they're saying iron deficiency anemia. So what we're saying is kind of like what I said earlier, if you are overweight, or if we correct for BMI, the red meat intake is not, or processed meat intake is not as problematic if you are lean. But if you are overweight, then we obviously have a problem. It's either the adiposity, the obesity attenuates the intake of saturated fat, or it's that you eat so much saturated fat that makes you obese. We're not sure. But people who are more overweight definitely should not be eating lots and lots of saturated fat. Now, this is especially true, obviously, if you're a smoker and do lots of other activity that hurts your cardiovascular outcomes. Long-term weight maintenance and cardiovascular risk factors are not different following weight loss on a carbohydrate-restricted diet high in either monounsaturated fat or protein in obese hyperinsulinic men and women. Now, you can read the details, but the difference between the two groups was not different. The idea here was in about 52 weeks to try to determine if you substituted monounsaturated fat for protein, if there would be a difference in cardiovascular risk factors, and they did not find a difference. So here again, we're looking at trying to change fat versus carbohydrate ratios and see if there was a difference, and we did not find any difference. Now, this is probably the one study that you all should look up and definitely know. If you're a cardiologist and you don't know the Finland study, we have a big problem. So, 1972, Finland, maybe I'll just go to the next slide. In 1972, the North Karelia area in Finland, in the region, had the highest CV mortality, cardiovascular mortality in the world. They had 700 deaths per 100,000 individuals. That is the highest in the world. So government officials said, this is problematic. 700 out of 100,000 is huge. We need to get this down. They sent dietitians and counselors and physicians and did community outreach programs where they taught in libraries and they discussed, ran TV commercials, whatever it was. They had this huge campaign to try and reduce these 4 things. One was saturated fat, hypertension, smoking, and obesity. They wanted to reduce all of those things. Now, they did. They were successful. And if you go back to this slide, you will see that when they started this project, and eventually they added all of Finland because they saw a huge decrease, 700 people per 100,000 were dying by 2011, or thereabouts 2012, and it's still ongoing. They still have data from 2014 and 18 that they're still looking at. There was an 84% reduction in mortality per 100,000 and 82% in all of Finland. Now, it was these 4 things that they tried to reduce. They were able to reduce saturated fat and blood pressure the most. Smoking and obesity, not so much. In fact, obesity stayed about the same or got worse. Smoking in women actually went up, but they still did reduce mortality by 84%. They say that 40% of this reduction is due to the reduced intake of saturated fat, and 20% of this reduction is due to the reduction in blood pressure. Now, men in that region had blood pressures of 180, 190, 200, 220 all the time, and women had similar ones, not as high, but in the 170 to 190 range. So those reductions were huge. They reduced saturated fat intake from 23-ish% of total calories down to less than 10%, or definitely less than 12%. You can read the details in the study. I have the link down at the bottom. I've got links to all of these if you download the slides. But this is a very nice epidemiological study. I told you there's all different kinds of studies you can do. This is an excellent study on a huge population of people. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands. They were able to reduce their mortality from 700 down to almost like 100 or so. Let me go back one slide. Yeah, less than 150, probably somewhere in the range of like 75 per 100,000, which became almost one of the best regions in the world for cardiovascular mortality. These were dairy farmers and rural people who ate eggs and dairy and cheeses and bacons and lard and, lots and lots of saturated fat, chicken skin, steaks, meat, red meat, all of that. Got it down to less than 10% of all calories. Boom, you had an 84% reduction in cardiovascular mortality. If you're a cardiologist training in cardiology, or even if you're a family practice doctor, whatever kind of doctor you are, you need to know this. Really, when you look at, and that's why this group that recently published that thing in October 2019 just really makes no sense. They looked at people who got 10% of their calories from saturated fat, who reduced it to 8%. Not a whole lot of a difference. And they said, oh, there's no difference. No, there is a huge difference. When you looked at what we had before, where people were eating 23, 25, 30% of their calories from saturated fat, butter, bacon, cheese, chicken skin, steak, ribeyes, lamb chops, ribs, whatever it is, pork, lard, all that stuff, margarine even. People used to eat that stuff like all the time. Routinely 25, 30, 35% of calories were coming from fat, especially since fat is so calorie dense. Now you reduce it to 10%, you get a whopping and almost 90% reduction in cardiovascular mortality. So you definitely need to know this study. Again, I'm just going to repeat this. Obesity and elevated BMI increase all inflammatory and cardiovascular risk factors. Obesity in and of itself is pro-inflammatory. People say, well, heart disease is an inflammatory disease. Yes, what causes atherosclerosis and strokes and plaques that build up in your arteries? It's not the cholesterol. Cholesterol tries to patch it up. It's the damage you're doing to your arteries from the high blood sugar, the inflammation, the hypertension causing the shearing of the arteries where the cholesterol tries to come in and patch it up. All of that is from increased inflammation, which obesity in and of itself, the more adipose tissue you have, the more inflammation you have. The people with less obesity have less inflammation. Calorie deficit and weight loss improve all cardiovascular risk factors regardless of how you lose that weight. Remember, even if you ate just Twinkies and lost weight, you will improve all of your cardiovascular risk factors. Macronutrient breakdown makes no difference. Leaner individuals have less cardiovascular risk. Yes. Protein, very important to protect lean body mass, satiety, and cause fat loss. And then we have to get your protein intake correct, and we'll get into those calculations later. But that protects you and makes sure you lose only fat and not lean body mass. Also helps signal satiety that you're full. Now, yo-yo dieting is a horrible thing. There's been lots of studies done on this, but one of the more famous ones, they had people in a semi-starvation state and then refed them. And here's what happened. This is where they started. This is the fat-free weight, and then the fat, lean body mass versus fat mass. When you starve people and they lose fat. You start refeeding them, they start gaining fat back. They do also lose lean body mass. You're in a calorie restriction or calorie deficit, you will lose lean body mass unless you're working out, lifting heavy weights, and eating tons of protein. The problem is when you gain weight back and you overfeed, this is hyperphagia or overfeeding, you gain back more fat. Your lean body mass kind of comes back to where it needs to be, but you gain back a lot more fat. And if you keep yo-yo dieting over and over again, your body loses more lean body mass, puts on more fat. Lean body mass losses, then more fat. You become very adapted or very efficient at losing lean body mass, but putting on fat later. So we definitely don't want to get into a cycle of yo-yo dieting. Now, if you've been doing this, it's not a problem. You can break the cycle. You have to lift weights and put on more lean body mass, which is not that hard to do. We'll get into that. Now, I'm going to kind of skip around a little bit because it's getting a little long here. But when you diet, you drop your calories, you drop your metabolic rate, lean body mass goes down, and fat mass goes down more. You look pretty decent, you lost all that. You start regaining weight by increasing calories, your metabolism goes up, your lean body mass goes up, but also you gain a lot of fat. Same thing with, in my studies, they've shown that when you first lose weight, you lose it at 1 times the rate, you regain weight at 2 times the rate, you diet again, like the yo-yo diet we talked about, you lose fat at half the rate of before, but you regain the weight back at 3 times the rate. So you definitely don't want to get into this scenario. So why diets fail? Well, there's lots of reasons why diet fail. You may find yourself and your patients falling into one of these categories, which is why we need to know how to teach our patients to lose weight correctly and properly and in a sustained long-term fashion that they can adhere to. So a lot of times it's because of calorie counting. They just don't want to count calories. Sometimes they're expensive if they're following some crazy diet that sends you food, or you have to eat a lot of red meat, it might be expensive. Some are just difficult to follow for whatever reason. They are too restrictive. You can't eat certain things. You have to count up points and measure things and weigh things. It becomes very, very difficult. Some are too extreme. You can only eat X, Y, and Z, and you have to eliminate these other 40 things from your diet. And, these are such and such. You don't want to go too extreme. Sometimes they're unhealthy. Eating cabbage soup or drinking just water or just pop, all these things are not healthy, and that's not good for you. Sometimes a diet is just not a good fit for you. If you like carbs and they're making you not eat carbs, it's just not going to work. You're fighting against your set point. Your body likes to keep you at 180. You keep trying random things to get lower or higher, and you're fighting your set point. Your body brings it back. The next one is you lose interest after you plateau and you adapt. Let's say you're at 180, you get to 150, you're stuck at 150 for a few weeks, can't change, can't get lower, kind of lose interest, and you slowly gain your weight back. The last one, which is very important, is calories are too low. You can't take a 240-pound male and put them on a 1,200 calorie a day diet. Calories are too low. It's impossible to stick to. They're going to feel starving all the time, and they're going to lose a lot of lean body mass because you've cut their calories so low. So you definitely don't want to do that either. There's a book by Dr. George Blackburn of Harvard talking about the set point and how to finally lose the weight you want and keep it off. It's one of the books I like. It's worth a read, and there's a lot of nice research studies and article and publications that he puts in there. He advocates for slow weight loss, kind of like we want, and taking away about 10% of your calories every day, which definitely works, and it protects lean body mass. He talks about, that's exactly what I said here. He actually invented the original formula for these Slim Fast shakes. He also talks about the Vermont prison experiment, where in 1964, they took half the inmates and overfed them and half the inmates and underfed them, because it was a very controlled environment. The half that ate more gained weight over 6 months, and the half that lost weight and were underfed lost weight over 6 months. Then when they left them alone, they all got back to their original weights. And that's kind of where the thought of the set point happens. They also did the Minnesota starvation study with celebrities. We'll just kind of skip that one. Very bad outcomes with starvation, and very bad relationships with food and losing lean body mass. The biggest battle we have is the fight to keep weight loss off. Most of us have lost weight. Without a doubt, most Americans and people all over the world have lost a significant amount of weight. But the problem is keeping that weight off. And some of that is due to metabolic adaptation. Some of it is just due to losing interest or not tracking or going back to bad habits or not being taught how to lose weight correctly, so you gain the weight back. So what is metabolic adaptation? Real quickly, we won't get too much into the details, but this is when your basic metabolic rate, your resting metabolic rate, or total daily expenditure goes down really low and can stay down for a very long time. This can happen for years. Like the biggest loser contestants that ate 1,200 calories a day and exercised for 8 hours a day lost a ton of weight over a very short period of time, but their BMR was reduced even 6 years later. It was 25% lower than 25 to 30% lower than what was expected. This is a genetically programmed self-defense mechanism to ward off starvation and enhance weight gain and storage, and reduces the chance of future diet success and enhances future weight regain. So if you try to crash diet too hard or eat very, very low calories, your body adapts to very low calories, especially if you're doing a ton of exercise with it. You're exercising every day, 5 days a week, and eating only 1,200 calories. You're going to adapt to that, and it becomes very difficult to not gain weight if you eat slightly more or not exercise that much for the rest of your life, which is very unsustainable because you can't do that forever. There is a buffer of about 200 to 300 calories. So if you need to eat 2,000 calories a day to maintain your weight, if you eat 200 or 300 more or 200 less, your body's still going to keep your body weight about the same. It'll reduce NEAT or increase NEAT or whatever it does to kind of buffer that change. So if you're used to 1,800 calories a day, one day you eat 2,000 or the next day you eat 1,600, your body will be fine. It can adjust your NEAT to kind of keep you and maintain your current weight. So the keys to fat loss. Let's get into the nitty gritty a little bit. So number one rule is you have to keep calories as high as possible while still in a deficit. So if you're losing weight at 2,500 calories a day, there's no reason to go to 1,200 or 1,800 or 1,600. You're losing 2,500. If you're at 2,500 calories a day, you're losing about a half a pound, maybe a pound and a half a week, or 2 pounds a week, depending on how much you weigh. That's fine. You want to lose about 0.5% to 1% of your total body weight per week. So keep your calories as high as possible. This helps protect your lean body mass and not lose, and so you're losing fat and not muscle. Slow maintained weight loss to protect lean mass, the slower the better. Multiple studies have been shown the slower you lose weight, the better. You didn't put this weight on overnight. You don't need to take it off overnight. Don't lower your fat too much. It decreases testosterone and other hormones. One thing I will mention is that saturated fat is not a necessary or essential item. You do not have to eat it. Your body can make it. Don't crash diet. Don't crash your calories down to like 800, 900 a day suddenly and then stay on that. That has very bad repercussions. In addition to not being healthy, you metabolically adapt to very low calories. And then if you have to increase your calories, you're going to gain weight. So if you got used to eating 1,000 calories a day, you do that for 3-4 months, you lose a bunch of weight. Now if you go to 1,200, you're going to start gaining weight again and you're not going to like it. You definitely need to be in a calorie deficit. That's very important. As long as you're in a calorie deficit, we usually recommend about a 10 to 25% calorie deficit at the most. So if you normally eat 2,000 calories a day to maintain your weight, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 1,800, maybe down to 1,500 should cause weight loss, and we want to keep it as high as possible. The next most important thing is to keep protein as high as possible. We'll get into the calculations. You want to strength train hard, because if you strength train, you will preserve your lean body mass, maybe even build lean body mass if you're obese or new to training. Refeeds and diet breaks, we'll get into this. Refeeds are like, after 3-4 weeks, you take a weekend off and you increase your calories back to maintenance. Diet breaks are like that as well, but much longer. Like after 3 months of dieting, we recommend taking 2 months off, increasing your calories back up to maintenance and staying to maintenance calories so you don't adapt to lower calories. You don't want to adapt to 1800, bump your calories back up to 2200, maintain your weight for 2 months, and then drop to like 2000 or 1800 again. Just start the losing process again. It gives you a nice mental and psychological break as well, preserves lean body mass, and you lose more fat instead of lean body mass. This was the Matador study. This is a group of people who would like lower their calories to a deficit for 2 weeks and then take a few weeks off. It took them twice as long to lose weight, but the conclusion is greater weight and fat loss was achieved with intermittent energy restriction. Interrupting energy restriction with energy balance rest periods may reduce compensatory metabolic responses and in turn improve weight loss efficiency. So you can read the details, but taking diet breaks helped you lose more lean body mass and preserve lean body mass and lose more fat, and in turn improve weight loss efficiency. So here are the key points from the Matador study. Despite the same energy deficit and the same total time spent in an energy deficit, a group taking a 2-week diet breaks after every 2 weeks of dieting lost 50% more fat mass compared to a group dieting continuously for 16 weeks. However, due to the frequency of these breaks, the group performing diet breaks required 30 weeks to complete all 16 weeks of dieting. So it took twice as long, but they had better results. Additionally, resting energy expenditure dropped only half as much in the diet break group compared to the continuous diet group when adjusted for body composition. So if you take diet breaks, your BMR is less likely to adapt and less likely to go down. This may be why the difference in groups favored the diet break group to a greater degree after 6-month follow-up, indicating diet breaks may help with the maintenance of weight loss after all diet concludes. So the group that took diets actually did much better in terms of body fat percentage and whatnot. Diet breaks appear to reverse important physiological adaptations to an energy deficit, subsequently making the dieting period following a break more effective for fat loss, while increasing the time required to complete a diet as much as was done in this study is probably impractical. Performing a diet break every 4 to 8 weeks versus every 2 weeks may be a useful strategy for physique competitors and weight class restricted strength athletes to enhance fat loss and mitigate declines in resting energy expenditure. So what we normally tell people now is diet for 10, 12 weeks in a row, then take 4 to 8 weeks back at maintenance to kind of reset your metabolism, bring your BMR back up, and you preserve lean mass, maybe even build some, and you will end up losing more fat mass. Plus, it's a nice psychological break. It's hard and fatiguing, and that mental diet fatigue, and always thinking about dieting and counting calories and restricting your food. It's just a nice break that kind of resets everything and gives you more calories to eat. So the next and most important thing is, how do we keep the weight off? Now, as I mentioned multiple times, we're pretty good at losing weight. Americans, people across the world, we've lost a lot of weight. The problem is keeping it off. So they've identified 5 characteristics to weight loss. The 5 characters that people have that are able to lose weight and keep it off. But before we get to that, and I just wanted to mention one last thing about diet breaks when it comes to the Matador study. They have found that the slower you lose weight, like if you go on the longer it takes you to lose weight and the slower you lose weight, the more permanent it becomes. Imagine you take 3 months, you lose a bunch of weight, and then you go back on maintenance calories for 2 months. And then you lose a bunch of weight again, then go on maintenance calories, then lose a bunch of weight again, then go on maintenance calories. And you keep doing that over and over again, over a process of a year and a half. You become used to these habits, used to the style, used to the lifestyle, used to that type of eating. And you are more likely to adapt those or adopt those habits and lifestyles, a new way of eating, a new way of thinking to a more permanent way of doing things. The studies and the experience that we have with, significant weight loss and long-term weight loss and permanent weight loss shows that permanent weight loss or very long-term weight loss, if it's done in a stepwise fashion with diet breaks, then more likely people are to stick to it. So now back to this. There are 5 characteristics that people have that are able to lose weight and keep it off. Number 1, and the studies and links for all that is down here. You can read these later or click on them on your own time. But the number 1 pattern or behavior characteristic we found is that they have some kind of cognitive restraint. Now that may be they're counting calories, or they're cutting their food in half, or they're making sure they eat quote unquote healthy, or whatever it might be. They're doing something, they're restraining something, and they've gotten used to it, and they're very good at it. The number 2 thing is self-monitoring, whether they're weighing themselves every day or tracking their calories every day, or looking in the mirror every day, looking how their food fits, tracking their weights in the weight room going up, some kind of self-monitoring. They're very good at self-monitoring and, giving themselves honest feedback. The third one is regular exercise, not because the exercise itself contributes to weight loss, although in the beginning it can, but mainly because it shows that they've formed good habits. If every day at 5 a.m. they wake up, go to the gym, and then go to work, or on the way home from work they stop at the gym, or they go on a walk with the kids every night, or they walk the dog, whatever it might be, some kind of regular pattern of some sort of activity does seem to go along with long-term sustainability and adherence. And the other part of it is because exercise helps maintain the weight you've already lost. We know, and in those studies that I've showed, that if you do regular exercise, or one thing that exercise is really good at is keeping weight off that you've already lost. The other one is structured programs. These people have a routine. They do X, Y, and Z before they do, A, B, and C, or they work out every morning. They eat the same exact thing for breakfast every day. They go to work at the same exact time, take the same roads, whatever it is. They have some kind of structure and discipline in their mind, and they're very disciplined and are able to carry through and do it for a long time. And the last one, obviously, is they're able to focus on long-term goals. They're not thinking about this like, how do I need to lose 30 pounds before this wedding in the summer? They're thinking about it of, look, it took me 30 years to put on this weight. I got to get it off over the next year or two, maybe 30, whatever. But they're able to focus on long-term goals. My cardiovascular health is important. My hypertension, diabetes, cholesterol, all my inflammatory risk factors, cardiovascular risk factor, all that stuff matters to them. And they're able to look at the long-term goals instead of like they just want a quick fix or a quick hit. Now, what happens if you hit a plateau? That's what we're going to talk about next. So the most important thing when somebody thinks they hit a plateau is to identify if they actually are in a plateau and why. If you are eating the exact same amount of calories and you're doing it right, first of all, identify if you're actually in a plateau. And the way to know that is you haven't lost weight in 3 to 4 weeks. A plateau is not like I stopped losing weight for 2 days or my weight went up. No. If you're doing the same exact thing and being adherent and following the plan, if in 3 or 4 weeks the weight hasn't really changed, then you're obviously in a plateau. Now, if this is after 3 months, this is the perfect time to take a diet break and increase your calories up to maintenance. You'll gain a few pounds right off the bat, but then it'll maintain. Like if you're at 180, you increase your calories up to maintenance, let's say 2,000, 2,200 calories a day, whatever it is. You'll gain up to 4 to 7 pounds maybe right off the bat because your body takes up glycogen, your muscles store glycogen. You gain that weight quickly, 5 to 7 pounds, and then you maintain 187 for the next 2 months while you get this nice diet break. You don't have to think about dieting as much. You can eat a little more freely. Your body increases your BMR, which is the most important thing. And you feel much better physically, mentally, psychologically, and all that. Now, if you really hit a plateau and you're eating, let's say, your same 1,800 calories a day, and your 3-4 weeks have gone by and you're no longer losing weight, there's a few things we can do. Number one is, first of all, you don't change protein, but you can lower your carbs and or fat by 5, 10, maybe 15%. So drop your calories slightly, but not protein, just the other two. Or you can try to increase your calories by 5, 10, or 15%. It's not going to make a huge difference unless it's that low, steady state cardio, like your step count. If you're doing 5,000 steps a day, try to get it up to 7,500 or 10,000. And these are all obviously relative to your current activity level. You remember, your body can't really adapt to low low intensity, steady state cardio. So if it's like increasing your steps, things like that, that's fine. But if you're like running sprints and doing crazy stuff, no, we definitely don't want you to do that. Just slowly increase a little bit of that NEAT and or exercise activity thermogenesis. If you're not doing anything at all, then obviously start. The problem with a lot of us is life revolves around food. Almost anything we think of, we need to go eat. Like, our lives shouldn't revolve around food. What are you doing for lunch? It's the first thing people ask me when I get to work. What are you doing for breakfast? What are you doing for lunch? If there's a funeral, a wedding, a going out or hanging out, bowling, everyone wants to eat. Whether you're happy or depressed or whatever, there's emotional eating. Now, I will say that there are people with very serious eating disorders, and following a plan like this may exacerbate those. So please see your psychiatrist. And also refer your patients to an eating specialist or an eating psychiatrist if you suspect that they have an eating disorder, because these are not things a cardiologist or a regular physician should be handling. If someone has an eating disorder and emotional eating and those kind of things, you have to send them to a specialist that knows how to deal with that. This is not my specialty. It's not your specialty. And it's very complicated and can even cause death. I mean, people have died from eating disorders, so send them to the right people. But the problem with our lives today is that everything almost revolves around almost anything anybody calls you up. Hey, dude, let's go hang out, and they want to go, eat. So people need to eat to live. Like, you need to eat X amount of calories to live for this long, or lift this much weight, or do this activity on the weekend. You don't want to do it the other way around. You don't want to live to eat. A lot of people, it seems like all they think about is food, and they just live to eat. So what causes weight gain? Here's where we can get into the nitty gritty a little bit. This is some of the stuff you guys learned back in medical school or, during your internal medicine residencies and board exams. Not going to get crazy with this, but obviously your hypothalamus and your hormones, they control your hunger, satiety, and homeostasis. Insulin, leptin, adiponectin, and ghrelin. Ghrelin is the hunger hormone. Imagine like your stomach is grumbling. It's a hunger hormone. It tells the brain that the stomach is empty. Gastric bypass surgery eliminates part of the stomach that secrete this. Traditional dieting boosts this level. When you diet hard, ghrelin goes up and your body thinks it needs to eat, which it does because it wants to maintain its body weight. Signals hunger 4 hours after previous meal. This is why they sometimes just tell people, well, try to eat every 2 to 3 hours so that you're not, signaling ghrelin, which it turns out, and we'll get into this later, that nutrition timing makes almost no difference if you're staying under your calories. Incretins in the small bowel tell the brain to stop eating. Once the food that you've eaten gets to your small bowel, signals say stop eating. Leptin is made in adipose tissue. Adipose tissue is fat tissue. This signals to the brain that enough fat has been stored in the body to be able to sustain a pregnancy or, whatever it is. People without leptin are huge. So leptin lets you know that you have enough, that you're satiated, you're full. And also the vagus nerve stimulates stretch. It's a stretch. When your stomach stretches out and fills up, it tells the brain that it's full. Now, this was a target of early meds, but what I tell patients now, if they don't feel like counting calories or being super strict, I tell them, cut your food in half and eat only half of your food. Wait 20 minutes. If in 20 minutes you're still hungry, because it takes 20 minutes for your stomach, that vagus nerve, to tell your brain that it's full, including the hormone signaling, but the stretch signaling. If in 20 minutes you're starving, go back and eat a little bit more. But if you're not really starving and you're just a little hungry, then that's fine. We want you to be just a little hungry. Now, mind you, with obesity, the hunger signaling is not there. It's very dysregulated. Appetite and satiety is dysregulated, so they may not even know. So just have them cut their food in half, wait 20 minutes, and if they don't feel anything different, just move on. If they're starving, you can go back and eat a little bit more. That's kind of how you can counsel patients to lose weight without really having to be very precise, downloading apps and tracking things. Here's another problem. There's a lot of medications that cause weight gain that we use to treat other conditions. Diabetes, certain medications cause weight gain. Antipsychotics, a lot of these cause weight gain. These ones listed here. Antidepressants cause weight gain. Almost all of them. Paroxetine especially, that's why I made it red. Same thing with epilepsy. Some of these medications cause weight gain. Steroids, without question. Blood pressure meds like beta blockers, antihistamines, opioids, all of these things cause weight gain. The other problem, a lot of medications that we give people for other conditions can cause weight loss. Metformin, Similac, Byetta, all these medications. A lot of these are cardiac medications. Certain blood pressure meds, ACEs and ARBs, Norvasc, Topamax, Wellbutrin, chemo, Flagyl, Amio, even. A lot of these medications cause weight loss. Now, the problem is a lot of our patients are put on some of these medications and some of these medications, or the problem is they're put on a lot of these medications and not enough of these medications. So it can be a huge problem. And a lot of times doctors are unaware of this, cardiologists are unaware of this. I don't know what some of these medications are that the pediatrician or not pediatrician, but the endocrine diabetes specialist is putting them on, or the epilepsy specialist is putting them on. I don't know, but these are ones to keep in mind and remember. If you can kind of commit this slide to memory, or when you download it, just print it out. These medications lead to weight gain. These medications can lead to weight loss. So if you had to pick, let's say, someone who's anxiety and depressed, pick Wellbutrin. It's actually an ingredient in some of the new weight loss drugs, but pick Wellbutrin because that actually helps with weight loss. So what are the weight loss medications? Now, there's a lot of them. There's Xenical, Atipex, Kisimia, Bonadryl, Contrave, and Saxenda. I use Saxenda here for the GLP-1 inhibition. It's a whole class of medications called GLP-1 inhibitors. And we'll go over a lot of them. Some really cool stuff going on with the GLP-1 inhibitors. For most states, check with your medical board or pharmaceutical board. You have to have a BMI over 30 or a BMI of 27 with a risk factor, hypertension, already had a heart attack, stroke, obesity, whatever. Obesity is the BMI, but have other risk factors, tobacco abuse, hypertension, age, whatever it might be. Now, the first medication is Xenical. This is Ally or Orlistat. This prevents fat absorption. Side effects are loose stool. Obviously, you're not absorbing fat, so it's coming out in your stool, diarrhea, oily stool. Modest weight loss, 4 to 6 pounds per year. You can buy it over the counter as one form and get it in another as a prescription. Atipex is probably the most common. This has a lot of effects. This is phentermine, and it used to be combined in fen-phen. It used to be fenfluramine, if you guys remember that, or dexafenfluramine. Caused a lot of heart disease, pulmonary stenosis, valve disease, holes in the heart, whatever it was, regurg. Caused a lot of problems, so they took fenfluramine out of it, and now it's just phentermine by itself. Phentermine by itself does not have the cardiac stuff. Obviously, as a cardiologist, you need to know this. But here's what it does. So it affects the hypothalamus to release norepinephrine, which is basically like an adrenaline, like a catecholamine. Also works on other tissues to release epinephrine to break down stored fat. Also releases small amounts of serotonin and dopamine. It's an anorexigenic, which makes you not want to eat, suppresses your appetite. So not only does it cause fat breakdown by this mechanism, it also causes you not to want to eat as much. I said when it was used with fenfluramine and dexafenfluramine, there was pulmonary hypertension, pulmonary stenosis, other heart disease, etc. Those two have been taken off the market and banned. The problem is with Atipex, and you see this all the time, is there's a tolerance to effect after a few weeks. When you first put somebody on it, they're doing great for a few days. A week or two goes by and I kind of don't feel it as much, and it kind of waxes and they don't really feel it as much. In Ohio, where I'm based out of, you're only allowed to be on it for 3 months, and then you got to be off of it for 6 months, and then you can go back on it. In those 3 months, it's a highly controlled substance. You have to see the doctor once a month to get a refill, and it has to be a handwritten prescription with no refills. In Chicago or Illinois, where I practiced before, it was not this controlled, and you could be on it forever without any, special circumstances. Some of the problems are amphetamine abuse. It's like being on speed or like on Adderall or crack or whatever you want to call it. It has stimulant side effects. When you first start it, if you're anxious, tachycardic, have hypertension, all that stuff ramps up. But once you've been on it 2-3 days, you got to warn your patients like, hey, by the way, just so you know, you might feel like a little jittery or anxious or nervous or feel like you're on speed or crack or whatever it is for a few days. Your blood pressure is going to be higher, you're tachycardic, more tachycardic, etc. 2, 3, 4, 5 days in the beginning, and then you kind of balance it out. It's kind of like caffeine. If you're not been on caffeine, you suddenly start taking it, you're going to get all those side effects. But then once you've been on it every day, those things kind of go away. Also, the problem with Atipex is withdrawal gives you fatigue. you actually feel fatigued, tired, sleepy, kind of like somebody who withdraws from caffeine. They've been on caffeine for a very long time. You get off of it and you're like fatigued, tired, want to sleep all the time. Avoid alpha blockers and other antidepressants with this medicine, although we have seen people take antidepressants with this. Now, the reason I'm spending so much time on Adipex is because it is the most commonly prescribed medication as of today for weight loss. The reason being is it's generic. It costs almost nothing. All these other things are super expensive and, in the thousands, if not more, per month, and are not even covered by insurance because they're considered cosmetic or not necessary. Now, that may change in the future, and we'll get into some of that. But this is the one that we probably use the most. With that said, medications are still rarely used for obesity and weight loss. They're kind of reserved for last resort efforts or someone who just needs it and has tried everything else. But we'll get into that kind of stuff a little bit later. So Qsymia is a combination of phentermine and Topamax. There's a lower dose and a higher dose. Topamax is an anticonvulsant, also used to treat migraines. It's an appetite suppressant. It's a modified fructose, and it's excreted in the urine. Side effects are like sleepiness, depression, fatigue, hair loss, glaucoma, nystagmus, and paresthesias. When combined with a low-dose phentermine, it is allowed in Ohio. I'm not sure how your state is or where you live, but the two low doses combined, you can be on this pretty much permanently without the frequent checkups, without all that. The next one is Bontril. This is phendimetrazine tartrate. It's similar to phentermine. Same thing, sympathomimetic amine, similar to phentermine. It's a stimulant. Magnitude of increased weight loss of drug-treated patients over placebo-treated patients is only a fraction of a pound per week. It has no valvulopathies, almost the same kind of contraindications as phentermine. Not used that often, but it's around. I've personally not had to use this. I have seen some patients in my clinic that someone else put them on this. Contrave is a combination of Wellbutrin or bupropion and naltrexone. Bupropion is dopamine, norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, and pure opioid antagonist. Reduces reward from eating, reduces cravings. Naltrexone blocks the MOPR and prevents the beta endorphin mediated feedback autoinhibition of POMC cells. Together, this combination produces a greater increase in POMC activity than either drug alone. This increased activity suppresses appetite. Now, one of the things that bupropion does is it reduces the reward center in the brain, which is why it also helps with smoking cessation. A lot of times you put people on Wellbutrin, you can get them to quit smoking because they don't receive that reward, that dopamine hit that they get from smoking. Eating is very, very similar. Some people feel very happy and very excited when they eat. This is the same thing for bupropion. In terms of smoking cessation or eating, you reduce the reward center, you knock out the reward center in the brain, and they don't feel as happy or as satisfied, or like it's not as fun or not as good to eat or smoke. They have a synergistic effect on weight loss. Effects on hypothalamus, decreases appetite about 11 to 6 pounds per year, about 5% of your starting body weight. I have seen this used in combination, and it seems to work. The next one is Saxenda. Now I'm going to talk about this because there's been some incredible advances. Ozempic, which is semaglutide, or Rybelsus. Now there's an injectable versus a PO version. Liraglutide is Victoza, which is also Saxenda. It's the same medication, just a higher dose. Ozempic, Rybelsus, Byetta, Bydureon, Trulicity, and Adalimumab. All of these are in this GLP-1 agonists. They are appetite, calorie intake regulation, but it does not increase energy expenditure. So it's not like Adipex. Almost all of these do decrease your appetite to a certain extent, but Adipex has the advantage of raising your metabolism and directly causing epinephrine to go up and actually burn fat stores. Usually for Saxenda, at least you start at a lower dose and work your way up to 3 milligrams. You cut back on other diabetic medications. Possible risk of pancreatitis, you got to monitor closely. Side effects are mostly GI, mostly nausea. You feel full all the time, slows down gastric emptying. You absorb more nutrients. You feel full and you feel like you don't want to eat anymore. Biggest side effect is nausea. Same thing with Byetta when it first came out. But only 9% of the people quit the study due to the nausea. 5 studies have been done on almost 3,400 patients. Diet, counseling, and Saxenda. We'll go over some of them. But semaglutide of all of these seems to be the most promising. And here's the research on semaglutide. They basically took people, body fat changes, placebo, which still did the diet and exercise, but didn't take semaglutide. Here they added semaglutide. They had a 16% drop in body weight compared to only about 5 or 6%. You can click on all of these studies here. They're fascinating studies. Achievement of categorical weight loss greater than 20%, the group with the semaglutide versus placebo. The groups that only lost 5% were very similar. Now, this is a nicer study. This is, a lot of people are criticizing semaglutide, saying, well, you're trying to shortcut fat loss. Instead of telling people to diet and exercise, you're telling them, here, just take this drug. Well, no, that's not true. They actually took people in this study. There's multiple different steps in the semaglutide study. The third step, they took people and made them all exercise and diet. They were all on a calorie restricted diet, and they all exercised in a very nice program for 68 weeks. Low calorie diet as well as intensive therapy, counseling visits, and including exercise therapy. They put some people on semaglutide and some people not. Among adults with overweight or obesity, once weekly subcutaneous semaglutide compared with placebo used as an adjunct to intensive behavioral therapy and initial low-calorie diet resulted in significantly greater weight loss during 68 weeks. Further research is needed. Now, these people lost, you can go through the details, 16%, back to this slide, 16% body weight reduction doing all of that plus semaglutide versus the group who did exercise and low calorie diet and lost 5 or 6%, maybe even like 7 or 8 at one point. But of course, there's always like diminishing returns. The group with semaglutide also bumped back up a little, but still that's huge. So, all these drugs in this class, I'm going to list them again: Ozempic, Rybelsus, Victoza, Saxenda, Byetta, Bydureon, Trulicity, Adalectin. All of these medications are in this class, and it looks very, very, very promising. Once again, I'm just kind of going, I'm beating a dead horse, but this is it's a free article. You can just click on it and read it. Semaglutide with diet and exercise versus semaglutide versus diet and exercise alone. And this, again, you see the same thing, 2% change body weight versus 15%. So it's a huge, huge difference of diet and physical activity with placebo and then with semaglutide. So very, very awesome. This was the Saxenda, the original Victoza Saxenda studies, percentage of people lost so much weight. You can look at this later. It's very, very promising as well. Now, I will say this about weight loss medications. First of all, this should not be your go-to. Patient comes in saying, hey, I want to lose weight. You don't say, oh, here's some semaglutide or here's some phentermine. No. First of all, they need to diet, and 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 they need to increase activity, and then diet some more, and then increase activity some more. Why do I say this? Because first of all, you have to teach your patients to eat correctly. There's no point putting people on a medication for weight loss when they can only be on it for a short period of time, especially like with phentermine. 3 months or over. I've seen lots of patients say, oh, I just want phentermine. Last time I lost, 10, 20 pounds on it, and I just want to lose a few pounds. They get on it, they lose 5, 10 pounds, and then a month or two later, they're off of it and they've gained back 20. You don't want people to depend on medications or chemicals or outside substances for weight loss. You want to see if they can learn to lose weight first on their own. And then once they demonstrate that they have changed their behavior and their eating and improved their behavior patterns, then you can put them on weight loss medications. Now, I will tell you that in reality, less than 1% of my patients take weight loss medications, maybe even less than that, probably like 0.5%. And actually, let me just go back. In the last 6 months, I think I've only put 1 or 2 people on phentermine. And that's about it, because everyone else actually does the diet, and they lose weight. And they're like, I don't need the medications. But they've never actually been taught how to lose weight correctly, and that's kind of the problem. So the reason we want people to first diet is because we want to maximize the short amount of time that they're on the drugs. If you can only be on it for 3 months, lose as much weight as you can. Once you're stuck, boom, we put you on phentermine or whatever it is, and your weight starts coming off again, hopefully. Not everyone's a responder. A lot of times you put somebody on phentermine, they come back in a month and they haven't lost anything, and in 3 months they've only lost 3 pounds. That's not weight loss. That's not anything. You also don't want frequent physician visits. They have to come back once a month to get the refill, and at least in Ohio. You need a social support network for them. If they're trying to lose weight, but no one in their family is, it's just like smoking. If the mom's trying to quit smoking, but everyone else in the house smokes, it's just not going to work. So frequent physician visits to kind of reinforce all this, frequent weigh-ins. They know their accountability. They know they're coming in to get checked. They need to get under their weight and be strict. They know that that's happening. So that's very, very important. Social support's important. Next, they need a phone app of some sort, some kind of tracking app. MyFitnessPal, I like a lot, and we'll go over a little bit of it. Give them diet resources and educational materials, daily weigh-ins. If they weigh themselves every single day and put that weight in their app and record it, they're more likely to be strict if their weight goes up, or they're more likely to kind of be happy if their weight goes down and do it more. So that puts in a lot of accountability. You want to put in as many accountability factors as possible. Now, the goals of a perfect diet. Let's talk about, we're getting near the end here. What is the perfect diet? Number one, it needs to be cheap and or free. If you're paying hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars a month for a diet or a plan or food or cans, or you can only eat organic this or organic that, or this special brand of this and special brand of that, you're not going to do it long term. Let's be frank. No one's going to spend thousands and thousands of dollars more a month than they should if they can eat whatever they normally eat and still lose weight. Next, it should be good for your health. We're cardiologists. You guys are in training, or you're an established physician. You need to tell people to eat things that are good for their health. Yeah, you can eat Twinkies every day and Oreos and Doritos. Their nutritional composition is not as valuable as, say, an apple or a salad, but it's still nutrition. But you have to teach them to eat within a way to lower their cardiovascular risk factors. And like I said, if they're eating within their calorie limit and losing weight, all of their cardiovascular markers improve. You need something that's easy to follow and doesn't require a master's degree. If you need to count a point for this and track that and weigh this, or subtract out this if you eat this many carbs, and if you took this many steps, you got to subtract that, it gets complicated and people are just not going to do it. They might do it for a couple of days, a week, lose interest and stop. It needs to be sustainable long term. We talked about some of the things that make it long term sustainable, with diet breaks and adherence and making a program and structure and all that. Those things all definitely help. It does not rely on fads or trends. You can follow the latest fad, the keto or the TB12 or the Whole30, or I'm only going to eat kale and quinoa or whatever it is. You can do that and it will work for a while, but then what? You get back to eating what you like and the way your family's been raised to eat and all that, and you're not going to sustain it long term. So we need to try to teach our patients ways to eat that are sustainable long term, that are not fads. Also, no outrageous promises. Well, if you eat only apples and oranges with this type of bread, Ezekiel bread or sourdough or whatever, then you'll lose 30 pounds in 30 days. I told you before, the only way to lose 30 pounds in 30 days is if we cut your leg off, probably. But you don't want to have a diet or plan or system that gives you outrageous promises. That's just not going to work. The next one is it needs to be evidence-based. Yeah, there's a lot of things that work. Lots of diets work, but there's no evidence to show that they're good for you or work long term or have the science to back it. There's a lot of junk out there, and there's a lot of junk science. There's lots of people, without naming names, that say this is the only way to lose weight, and here's all the studies. Yeah, I could go find studies right now that prove any kind of diet you can ever imagine causes weight loss. But like I said, we have to look at the totality of evidence and the long-term studies and whether they were good studies and who funded them and who didn't fund them. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there that shows you that almost every single diet you can imagine actually works. It does not mean it's good for you. You also need to figure out a way to teach your patients that, or give them a diet or a plan that's helps create a healthy relationship with food. You don't want to teach your patients that there's such a thing as healthy foods or good foods and bad foods. Yeah, your kid wants to eat some pizza or ice cream. Like, oh, that's bad for you. Don't eat it. No, they can eat it, just not a lot. If they're going to eat a bowl of ice cream, they can't eat something else later in the day. Or if they're going to have a cheese pizza or something that's very calorie dense, they have to subtract out something else later. We don't want kids, especially, and even adults. We treat adults as cardiologists. I'm not a pediatric cardiologist, but even as an adult, when I deal with my own children, I don't want them to have a bad relationship with food. I'm not going to tell them, well, the cheese pizza is horrible, but the quinoa or lentil soup is better. They both have nutrition. There's more fat in the cheese pizza. There's carbs. There's a little bit of protein in the cheese. The lentils has more fiber, more carbs, a little bit of protein. It's a different makeup. If you need more fat today, you can eat the cheese pizza. If you need more, fiber and carbs, you could eat the lentils. They have some protein in them too. But you got to teach people to think of food that way. You don't want people to think of food as either good or bad, especially not patients, especially not kids. You don't want them to develop eating disorders and all that crazy stuff. It's horrific. But teach your patients as well as your children to eat things that they need. But if they're more calorie dense, like a bag of Doritos, those little ones are 240 calories, you then can't eat a bowl of ice cream later or 2 bowls of ice cream, maybe half or whatever. But you got to learn to budget your calories. And we'll get into the details of all that later, but just know this from now. Also, you don't want a diet that's too restrictive. If your diet says you can only eat black beans on Monday, but never any other day, and you can only eat green dark spinach on Thursday, but you can't have this, and that, like a super restrictive, whether it's time restricted diet or food restricted or food group restricted or whatever restriction it is, you don't want a diet that's so restrictive that it's like nearly impossible to stick to forever, and people just get sick of it. So those are the kind of things that we want in a perfect diet. There's probably more, but this is what I came up with and what the research has shown. So what do we tell patients? This is what I tell my patients. Like, listen, John, Bruce, Leslie, Kimberly, Ali, Muhammad, whatever. Eat what you like to eat. Whatever you've been eating for the last 20, 30 years, that's what I want you to eat. You're going to eat that for the next 20 to 30 years because I'm not going to be able to change 40 years of behaviors and patterns and family history and family eating patterns. You eat this. You've been eating this for the last 40 years. This is what I want you to eat now. It just has to be a lot less. And that's the key. This sentence right here, it just has to be a lot less. I say this to all my patients. Now, there's different ways of achieving that. You can track with an app. If you want to track with an app, we can help you set it up. But most apps, especially MyFitnessPal, which we'll get into, are pretty good at calculating out your starting calories. If you're not losing weight in a month or so, we can adjust them slightly down. If they don't want to track with an app, what I tell patients to do is cut all their food in half, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, whatever. Cut it in half, wait 20 minutes, and move on. If you're just a little hungry, move on, no big deal. If you're starving, go back and eat just a little more. Suddenly they cut out half their calories. They should lose half their body weight. The other thing I always tell them is don't feel bad if you mess up. This is, you gained weight in the 20, 30, 40 year process. You're not going to lose it overnight. If you eat 5,000 calories in one night at a wedding, or you had ribeyes, or whatever you did, drank a ton, whatever, move on. Don't feel bad for yourself. Don't punish yourself. Don't feel horrible. Don't go back and think, well, I need to go to the gym and work out. Don't punish yourself for a bad day or starve yourself the next day because you did so horrible the day before. That's developing a bad relationship with food and a bad relationship with exercise for that matter. Don't go to the gym and punish yourself by working extra hard or whatever. Just move on. Go on to the next day and start over. Not a big deal. We're looking at the next 2 to 5 years, 6, 12 months, a year and a half, 5 years from now, you're going to keep losing weight. Just look at the long-term goal. And next, we're going to adjust calories over time. If we put you on 1,800 calories or 1,500, 1,600, whatever, 2,500, you're not losing weight after a month, we will lower it. Not by lowering protein, though, with the other stuff. The next thing I always tell patients is start moving. If you're over 300 pounds or sometimes even 260, you're probably not moving a lot. Pick anything you like, and I mean anything, and just start doing it. Even if that's just walking around the house, playing golf, walking up and down the street, walking your dog, playing with your kids, playing soccer with your kids, coaching your kids, going up and down slides, water slides, swimming. I don't know. Go online and Google activity. There are billions of them that you can do that are nearby your house, and tons of people like you doing them around your neighborhood. So go start doing them. It's not a big problem. The next thing is keep doing this for the next 2 to 10 to maybe 20 years or more. This didn't happen overnight. You didn't gain 50 to 100 pounds in 20 minutes or the last 6 months. This happened slowly over time. Usually most people after age 30 gain about a pound per year. After age 20, gain about a pound per year. That's like 30 pounds if you're 50, but a lot of times it's even more. So just look at it this way. You've got time. Time is on your side. Just start all of this, okay? Now, the diet part. This is very important. I prefer if people ate what they want, but just controlled their calories. As you've seen from the hundreds of billions of studies that we've just gone over, if you control your calories and you're in a calorie deficit and you're losing weight, everything gets better. So here's what I tell people to do. Usually your maintenance calories are your weight times 12 to 14. So if you're 200 pounds, that's about 2,400 to 2,800 calories. For most people, that's your maintenance calories. If you want to lose weight, multiply your weight by about 10. So that's 200. If you're 200 pounds times 10, that's about 2,000 calories a day. For most people, this should work. Now, if you've been dieting for a long time and all that, you may need slightly less. If you're been in a severe calorie deficit for a super long time, eating 1,200 calories a day for a whole year and exercising like a mad person, that's called metabolic adaptation. We have to reverse you out of that. It's a whole other topic. I have an actual YouTube video on it. Just go on YouTube, type in metabolic adaptation, Dr. Allo, and you'll find out how to get out of it. But that's beyond the scope of this lecture. Now, the next most important thing after we set your calories. Now, in some females, you may have to multiply by 9 or 10, but just start at 2,000, and then after a month, we can slightly lower it if it's not working, or increase it if it's working too fast. The next thing is to take your body weight times about 0.7 or 1.2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. So in that same 200 pound person, you're looking at about 140, 240 grams of protein. Now, for most women, you probably need between 80 and 140, maybe 160 grams of protein. For most men, as low as 120, maybe up to 180, 200 at the most should be plenty. Now, if you're like a 200-300 pound person or more and pretty strong and muscular and fit, you may need more protein. Now, the rest of your calories can be any combination of fat and carbs. Make sure when you go into MyFitnessPal that you adjust your goals and increase the protein to match this number, whatever you calculated here, because it usually doesn't match, and you can lower your fat and carbs to kind of fit in the rest. So once again, stressing this again, protein being high helps with satiety and is likely what causes more weight loss on higher protein diets. It's not that a high protein diet in and of itself is the problem. It's that the protein makes you feel full. Now, when they've controlled calories and protein, regardless of anything else, weight comes off and cardiovascular mortality goes down and cardiovascular risk factors go down. Like I said, I'm just going to recap this again. Calories out is very difficult to control. So what we try to do is control calories in. This is the magic. This is where all the magic happens. If you have to save one slide and screenshot it or whatever, this is the slide that you have to save. This right here, I don't know where I'm pointing, this way or that way, I think it's over here. This is the slide you have to save. That's where the magic happens. This is where all the weight loss happens. Everything else you could probably delete or just use as background information. This is it. Now, we kind of talked about this already. I'll skip it. MyFitnessPal, set up an account, put in your data, age, sex, weight, height, just make a free account. You don't need to pay. Don't connect your fitness tracker. We don't care if you did 10,000 steps one day or 2,000 the next. We don't want to subtract back or add back calories based on activity levels. Adjust your calories to your goal. First, go to the goal section under there. change your calories to meet your weight times 10. And then usually if you set your protein, let me point this way, if you set your protein to 40, 40, 20, protein, carbs, fat, that usually is probably about right if you calculate out your protein needs. Start tracking for 4 weeks, weigh yourself daily. If you're losing more than 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week, if you're losing more faster than that, you probably should increase your calories. If you're losing weight way slower or not at all, you probably should decrease your calories. We usually say decrease your calories about 5 to 10%. For most people, that's like 150 calories or so, maybe 200, like anywhere between 50 and 200, I guess. You have time. You don't have to go crazy cutting your calories like crazy. Remember, the key is to keep your calories as high as humanly possible while still causing weight loss. Because we don't want to adapt to lower calories, because if you're eating 2,200 calories a day, you're losing weight for 6 months, then you finally get stuck and plateau. We can drop it to 2,000 or 1,950, no big deal. If you start out at 1,200 calories a day and you're losing weight, in 3, 4, 5 months, you stop losing weight and you adapt to that 1,200. Now, what do we do? Do we go to 1,000, 800? I mean, it's super, super low and very, very, it's a bad place to be. You don't want to adapt to such low calories. It's kind of like what MyFitnessPal looks like. Tells you need to eat 1,900 calories a day. You add to your diary. You can add your weight every morning. And then here's kind of your goal. I would not connect a fitness tracker so you're not trying to eat back calories that you don't need. Remember, we said exercise and activity is barely 5% of your total daily energy expenditure. There's no reason to track it or give yourself back calories because you did more that day. Let's say you're doing all this and you're not losing weight. Usually it's a problem with tracking. We recommend getting a food scale, weigh your food in grams, and I even mean like a small little green grape. Every little green grape for the first 2 weeks, if you're not losing weight, put it in there, weigh it in grams and track it in grams. That's how you know exactly how many calories you're eating. Most of the time, if you're not losing weight at your set calorie counts, because you're eating way more calories than you think. Most of my patients, they come in to see me, they're like, oh, doc, I don't eat anything. I eat like 1,200 calories a day. I'm still not losing weight. And then we go through, okay, well, tell me what you ate for breakfast. Like, well, 2 pancakes, some syrup, toast, and some butter. Like, well, that's about 900 right there. What'd you have for lunch? Well, chicken sandwich with mayonnaise and blah, blah, blah. That's like another 500-600. And what'd you have for dinner? Oh, pot roast, beef pot roast with vegetables and potatoes and blah, blah, blah. That's like another 700-800. And they're already like in the 2,000 to 3,000 range. And sometimes it's even more. So most people are not good at knowing how many calories they're actually eating. That's why I tell patients a lot of times, just track your calories for 2 weeks. Don't even change what you eat. Just track for 2 weeks. It's an education and it's mind-blowing. It's an education in how many calories you're actually eating. And it blows their minds most of the time when they realize that they're eating 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day and not just 1,200 or 1,500. Now, the biggest problem is the diet after the diet. So let's say you lose a bunch of weight, you're about a year and a half into this, you're down to 170 pounds for a guy, 130 for women, whatever you want to be. I'm not here to tell you what to weigh, but let's say you're happy with your weight loss. And let's just use me as an example. I'm 165, maybe 170 pounds. Your new maintenance calories are going to be lower. When at 200 pounds, I could eat 2,200 calories, 2,400 calories a day and maintain my weight. Now that I'm 160, 170, I probably need about 1,800 or 1,900 to maintain my weight. My BMR is also lower because I've lost body mass. My body mass is less. I have less lean body mass, less fat, so my metabolism is lower. If you're done with your diet or cutting phase or weight loss phase, now you have to do something called a reverse diet to slowly get out of this lower calories. And that also is with metabolic adaptation. You want to increase your calories slowly. So let's say you're at 1,800 calories a day. You're down to your ideal body weight of 160. You would add back 150. Do that for like a week. So now you're at 1,950. You're cruising along for a week. You're looking pretty good. You've gained back a little bit of weight, but not a whole lot. Like I said, we usually, when you come off a cutting phase, when you come off of dieting, your body will take up glycogen. Once you increase your calories back up to maintenance, your muscles take up glycogen, and for every gram of glycogen, you usually put on 3 ounces of water. You'll gain some water weight and glycogen. You'll bump your weight up between 4 to 7 pounds. and you can slowly get your calories back up. Let's say I was 170, I got up to 177. I got my calories up to 2,000, staying at 177, 2,100 calories, staying at 177, 2,200 calories, staying at 177, keep going every week, add a little bit more. Finally, I get up to 178, 179, 180. Then that's when I've hit my maximum caloric intake. I got to drop it back down a little to get back to like 177. That's my actual maintenance calories. So that's kind of what you want to do. This also, if you do it slowly like this, it minimizes fat regain. And there's the studies down here. Of course, you can always click these guys. So weight regain, this is somebody cuts their calories. This is your calories, the blue line. Cut your calories, you lose weight, and the body fat is the yellow line. Lose weight down to here. Suddenly increase your calories. Boom, your fat goes way up. If you do it another way by reverse dieting instead of rapid overfeeding, this is you cut your calories, your total daily energy expenditure goes down, and then you start like what I just explained earlier. Increase your calories by a little bit, then another little bit, then another little bit. You continually and slowly increase your calories. You just your total daily energy expenditure keeps going up. You start being able to eat more calories without gaining that much more fat. So your body fat levels stay a little bit lower and stay in check. That's why you see these people who are like really lean bodybuilders, when they start refeeding, as long as they don't do it like in a crazy fashion like up here, they can put on muscle mass and start gaining weight back and glycogen and feel more refreshed without putting on that much fat. So resources, my favorite macro calculator is the one on Macros Inc. If you just go to Macros Inc. or type in macro calculator by Macros Inc., you'll find it. Great place to start. I probably use this for 99% of my patients or clients. They'll tell you how much protein to eat, carbs, fat, whatever. I don't really care about the carbs and fat because, like I said, all that matters is total calories and protein. Great place to start. They also have a Facebook page. It's free. Lots of helpful, supportive people in there. If I had to recommend one single weight loss book, it would be the book by Dr. Layne Norton. He's a PhD in nutritional and science, and this is by far the best book. If I had to tell you to get one single book on weight loss, this would be it. Without question, I would not recommend any other book. Now, there is one other book written by Melody Schoenfeld. I think she's the wife of Brad Schoenfeld, who's written a ton of books on muscle hypertrophy. He's actually written the Bible on muscle hypertrophy, which is how to grow muscles. This book I like because it goes through kind of every diet and the research behind it. Like it'll say keto diet, and it'll explain to you what a keto diet is and all the research behind it. Low carb diets, low fat diet, well, whatever diet it is. But I like it a lot. It has a lot of studies in there and that are very well done. Her and Dr. Susan Kleiner, this is an excellent book. I don't recommend a lot of weight loss books. If you had to pick one, I would still pick this. He lists all the studies as well from beginning to end, more than you'll ever need to know. Entire chapters on millions of things. I love his stuff. I follow him, and I highly recommend following Dr. Layne Norton on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, whatever. He's all over the place, and his work is great. And this book I came across more recently, and I liked it because of all the studies and going through all the different diets. They don't necessarily tell you how to lose weight. This book does, but this definitely does teach you some of the science behind why some of these things work or don't work. Now, this is the golden fat loss pyramid. Number one, most important thing is a calorie deficit. You have to be in a deficit. The next most important thing is you get enough protein, which is about 1 gram per pound. You have to lift weights so you can protect your lean body mass and or grow muscle. You got to get enough sleep so that you can recover, and then do some cardio or some kind of fun activity that you enjoy. These are the least important. These are the most important. Something else that I find useful, non-negotiable, is you have to be in a calorie deficit. You absolutely have to be in a calorie deficit. Highly advisable. Making sure your plan, whether it's eating or dieting, is easy to stick to, consuming adequate protein, resistance training, active, nutritious foods, adequate sleep. Stuff most people don't need to worry about is what is the best diet, how many meals do you eat, carb to fat ratio, calorie cycling, blah, 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 all this junk stuff that can just go away and wish would never come back. Unnecessary food avoidance. This is how you develop a really bad relationship with food. Cheat meals, juice cleanses, weight loss tea bags, quick fixes, false promises, blah, blah, blah. Unfortunately, this is the stuff that most people seem to care about, where they should be focusing on a deficit and just getting enough protein, doing fun stuff, trying to eat more nutritious, wholesome foods. And that's about it for that one. How to destroy your diet. Let's say you're supposed to eat 1,800 calories a day, lift weights to lose weight. You're doing very well throughout the week. You eat 3,500 on the weekend, which puts your average to 2,300, hence no weight loss, because you're supposed to be eating about 1,800 to lose weight. We talked about this already. You can look at it again. Losing weight is not linear. Fat loss is this green line, but weight loss is this red line. It's going to bounce up and down, especially if you have periods, hormone, stress, you ate more glycogen, you worked out one day, your muscle takes up glycogen and water. All of these things affect this. So focus on fat loss, weekly averages, your weight's going to go down. There's going to be a lot of bumps and ups and downs on the road to weight loss. Some funny cartoons. These two adults say, oh, they look more like us every day. Well, it's because they live together and they're not inheriting they have inherited your genetics, but they've more so inherited your eating habits. They eat with you, sit with you, develop a relationship with food with you, etc. Same thing with these kids. They're sitting around playing video games, and the parents are saying, I can't get them to go outside. And on the older days, they couldn't get them to come inside. The appendix. Now, this is very, very important. I highly recommend going through every single one of these articles. I listed them all here because people say, Dr. Allah, where do I get all these articles? Do you have a list of all these articles? Well, here they are. Articles demonstrating that weight loss depends on energy balance only, which is calories, and that macronutrient composition does not matter at all. And some of these we talked about, some of them we didn't. And then another very important one to look at is low fat was actually superior to low carb. If you look at these studies, this favors low fat, favors low fat, favors low carb, favors low carb. All of these studies since the 1990s through 2000, 2001, 2016, every single year till 2014, 16, 2015, most of these studies, when it comes to weight loss, have shown that low fat diets actually do better than low carb diets. So nearly every study ever done, every well-done study, let's say, not someone trying to prove a weird point or funded by some weird industry, but all the really well-done studies have shown that low-fat diets cause more weight loss. Article demonstrating that proteins and fats have a greater thermic effect of food than fat. This is a good review of that. Articles demonstrating that while sugar intake has decreased over the years, obesity continues to rise. These are trends in dietary sugar intake, trends in dietary carbohydrate consumption from the 1991 to 2008, trends in sugar sweetened beverage consumption among youth and adults since 1999 to 2010. Excellent studies that I highly recommend. Articles demonstrating that the biggest contributor to the increase in caloric intake over the years has been fat, not sugar, along with the graph showing the composition of diets from 1970 compared to 2010. So 1970s is lighter yellow, 2010 is a darker yellow or orangey color. There has been an increase in grains and grain products, but the biggest increase is still in fat. And because fat is so much more calorie dense, it's 9 calories per gram versus 4. This has been huge. Red meat, almost everything else, sugars, almost everything else has been about the same, but definitely the biggest increase has been in increased fat. Articles demonstrating that the differences in glycemic load do not affect weight loss or gain. I'm not going to read you all these titles. You can read them, but they're excellent studies. More of them here. Articles showing that sugar does not cause fat gain unless also accompanied by an increase in calories. A lot of people try to say, well, it's because of all the processed sugars. Everybody's eating so much sugar, eating so much carbs this, carbs that. No. If you're in a calorie deficit, it does not matter if you're eating pure sugar, Twinkies, Doritos, Oreos, whatever. All that matters is that you need to be in a calorie deficit. If you are in a calorie surplus and eating all of these extra sugars, then yes, you will gain weight, but the calorie surplus alone also is causing the weight gain. Articles demonstrating that low-carb diets do not cause more weight loss than low-fat, high-carb diets when calories and protein are equated. We went through some of these already. I'll just leave these here. They are clickable. You can go to all of these and read them on your own. Articles demonstrating that insulin levels do not predict weight gain. A lot of people say, well, what about the insulin? You know, if you eat a bunch of processed sugars, you're going to spike your insulin and that's the problem. No, that is not the problem. It's the overall caloric intake is the problem. Yes, if you're eating way too many calories, then insulin spikes will matter. If you're hypocaloric or in a calorie deficit, that's not going to matter. Articles showing that overfeeding carbohydrates or fats are both equally fattening in humans. Yes, the more you eat, and if you're over your calories, you will gain weight. Now, articles showing that non-nutritive sweeteners, these are like Splenda, aspartame, whatever, zero calorie sweeteners, caused more weight loss than when compared to water. It's a very well done study. People drank, they told them just add more water to your diet. They added more water to their diet. They lost a little bit of weight. The people who add these non-nutritive sweeteners lost a lot more weight. And then when you look at keeping the weight off, the people who had these non-nutritive sweeteners gained back 0.5%, whereas the people who were on water gained back, 2.5% of weight gain. If you want to find me, this is how. I know you're probably gonna have a million questions, but this is how you find me. These are my kiddos. They're getting a little bit older. This is a lot of them when they were younger. And that's all. I'll open up the floor to any questions. I'm sorry this was 3 hours, but this is it. You do not have any more questions about weight loss. I'll be happy to answer them or discuss any of these things. You can also come up to me afterwards after the presentation and we can chit chat offline or online or however you want to do it. Thank you guys.